Afternoon. Good to see everybody out in WebEx land and all of us here in person. I'd like to call our meeting to order for our February 4th meeting of the Fort Worth Redistricting Task Force. I'm assuming everybody understands that this is our last meeting as a task force, which is, I'm so glad we had this time together. But first, I've got a couple of comments. And first, I want to thank, first of all, the residents of Fort Worth who have walked along with us on this journey to bring education and sunshine to the governing process that happens every 10 years, redistricting. As an observer and a participant in this process and this journey, I want to highlight two observations that really stuck out to me. One, the residents of Fort Worth should make a more concerted effort to vote in the municipal elections. How can people complain about what goes on in the city when they don't even bother to use the power they have of the vote? Secondly, it's not enough for us to, we have to communicate beyond our own groupings. We sort of live in silos, and if it doesn't come to my front door, I don't really get concerned about it. Neighborhoods should come together around shared interests to promote the common good. That fosters, in my humble opinion, good and responsive government. And my prayer is that the Race and Cultural Task Force and to our redistricting task force, our residents realize more than ever that they must get involved and vote. Secondly, I want to thank the outstanding men and women of this task force, each of you who have given the time and the support of to this task force. You thought beyond the August 2020 resolution that created us as a task force, and you were mindful of the residents that what we could do in this short period of time to move the needle toward a more active and informed community. That's why I believe our Redistricting 101 seminar and the public hearings we participated in were very significant. We heard from residents, and now it is our task to make the recommendations to our city council so that the voices of the residents of our city can still be heard and heeded. I salute your efforts, and I am proud to have served with you. Lastly, we could not have done any of this without the support of the city staff. I think Mr. Fernando, Costa, Ms. Kayser, Ms. Gutt, our city attorney, all of these folks, the folks that helped us with our demographics, and the technical, just making sure that we are heard and can see each other, has been very important and necessary. So we thank you, and if we would, I think we ought to give our staff a little applause for the work that they've done. Really appreciate it. Now, if any of the other task force members have anything that you want to add, just a quickie, not a quickie, but.
Watch yourself.
Yeah. Anybody else have any comments? Lastly, I had the privilege of working for, I think, the greatest humanitarian I've ever known, and that's Congressman John Lewis. And Lewis said something that really struck me. He always had the good sayings, but this one was really good, and I think apropos for our situation. His quote is, "Ours is not the struggle of one day, 1 week, or 1 year. Ours is not the struggle of one judicial appointment or presidential term. Ours is the struggle of a lifetime, and maybe many lifetimes. And each one of us in every generation must do our part. If we walk away from this task force with that in mind, we must do our part, and I think we have. Okay. We will now proceed to our approval of the minutes. We've got a lot we want to cover today, so
Full approval.
is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Spino. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Mr. Bradshaw? Great. It's been properly moved and second. We've approved our minutes. Ms. Kayser, are you comfortable with that? Yes. Great. All right. We'll move on now to the summary of our written and oral comments that we received from the public hearings. Ms. Gutt has been very kind of getting all this material to us, and Ms. Gutt?
I sent everybody a copy, and the last version I sent this afternoon because we had a few comments that came in after our meeting on the 21st. So I've included all of the comments that we've received. These came in through Facebook, text, email, and some by phone. And I've broken it down by meeting.
So you need to get Tracy's face up.
Okay.
On the screen. Sorry.
Okay. With the document that I sent, I also included links to the Facebook pages and the videos so that you could, if you had any questions, you could actually go and see the comments in the context that they were given. I also provided with you all a document that has all of the outreach that we did as part of the redistricting task force, educating people on the task force, and also letting them know about the meetings. So I provided that to you all with links to the articles and also the social media posts. So if anybody has any questions about the material that I sent, I believe Fernando's going to cover it in his presentation. But the three primary topics that kind of jumped out, and I think all of you probably know the number one topic, which was the Independent Redistricting Commission. The other two that I saw as recurring themes were public participation, a need for more public participation, and the need for transparency. And for the transparency piece, we have a page on our website, which is Redistricting, where we have included all of the presentations, all of the information that's been distributed during your different meetings. We're going to keep that page up. We will be adding all the public comments. We're currently getting that translated into Spanish so that we can post both of those. And we see this as kind of a page where we'll put all redistricting information as we go down this road and we get further into the actual redistricting that will take place. So if there are any other questions or suggestions, I would be happy to hear them.
Any questions, any suggestions, committee members? Great, thank you, Ms. Gutt.
Thank you.
Chair Miller, if we could have just a moment so we can get all of our task force members up on the screen. So
Okay.
we're getting the evil eye from Leanne back there in the back corner. I think that'll, yeah. I think that's everybody that's online right now.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Mario. Thank you.
Great. Mr. Costa? You have a copy of his briefing before you. And he's going to go through it kind of quickly.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. Thank you, Demar. You should have received version 7 of a presentation entitled Draft Findings and Recommendations of the Redistricting Task Force. we'd like to review this material with you. It includes some background information, which you will be imparting to the City Council on March 2nd when you present your final report to the council. But of greatest importance will be a series of issues and options on which we would like for the task force to entertain motions and make decisions. There are actually a total of at least 18 decisions that we want you to make this afternoon. The first 5 pertain to what we've described as major issues to be addressed by the task force, and they appear on your agenda. And most of them result from what you have heard in the various public hearings and comments that you have made subsequent to those hearings. So the first 5 are what we've called major issues with the corresponding options. The next 3 are additional issues. We've called them other issues that also require your attention with respect to redistricting criteria and procedures. And after we review those issues with you, we'd like to walk through them one by one and get your decisions. Answer any questions you might have, and then entertain motions, discussion, and action. Afterwards, we'd like to entertain a series of motions that are being brought to your attention by Task Force member Bill Schur. He has brought forth 10 motions, which he'll be able to describe to you so that you can decide whether or not you want to proceed along those lines. So with that background, I'd like to begin. Next slide, please. And this is just a reminder for the City Council of the task force members whom they have appointed, along with the staff that have been providing you with support. Next slide, please. And just a reminder, which I think we've shown at virtually every meeting of the task force, your charge is to advise the City Council about redistricting criteria and procedures. And the resolution creating the task force contemplated that the City Council, rather than an independent redistricting commission, would redraw the council district boundaries. Next slide, please. The task force has established 3 broad goals for what it's seeking to accomplish. First, to prevent what is commonly known as gerrymandering, that is, manipulating lines on a map to give unfair advantage to one group over others. We want to prevent gerrymandering. Second, and this is directly in line with the recommendation from the Task Force on Race and Culture, to provide the best opportunities to elect council members who reflect Fort Worth's diverse population. And of course, Fort Worth is becoming increasingly diverse. In fact, using common terminology, we are now a majority-minority city, whereby African Americans and Hispanics and other traditional minority groups now represent, in the aggregate, a majority of the city's population. And third, in the way of goals, is to promote education and public participation. We will get the best results to the extent that our residents take part in the redistricting process. We've heard that loud and clear, and the recommendations certainly aim in that direction. Next slide, please. And so a brief reminder of what you've done so far. You started back in August. You held meetings in September, October, and November, collecting all kinds of information about redistricting and eventually settling upon a set of preliminary findings, which you then took out to the public to receive comments at the public hearings. You did that after presenting an interim report to the City Council back in December. The Council said, yes, you're on the right track. Please proceed. Next slide, please. And of course, you held the seminar, which we called Redistricting 101, to prepare the public to participate constructively in the public hearings, which they did. We had good participation in 3 hearings, 2 in English, 1 in Spanish. And thank you all as task force members for taking part in those hearings and listening carefully to our residents. I've highlighted here sections of the calendar that may merit some discussion. Today, of course, we're reviewing comments from the public hearings and asking you to agree upon final recommendations that will go to the City Council. And then we've added a couple of items. By Friday, February 12th, that's a week from tomorrow, staff would like to provide you with a draft final report, a draft version of the report that you would be delivering to the City Council on March 2nd. They're asking you to take a close look at it and make sure it conforms to your expectations about the decisions that you will be making today. So that's just a check to confirm that staff has accurately captured your intent in the way of recommendations. And then if you agree with what we said but don't agree with what the task force has concluded, if you want to prepare a minority report that reflects your views and perhaps the views of other task force members, but not the majority, then you are certainly free to prepare a minority report. We concur with these items, but we don't agree with these others. And if you do wish to prepare a minority report, we would respectfully request that you submit it to us by the following Friday, February 19th, so that we might be able to deliver that information in a timely way to the city manager and then to the City Council. So we would promise to give you a draft report by the 12th. We would ask you, if you have a minority report that you want to submit, that you do so by the 19th. And then, of course, March 2nd is when you present your report to the City Council. And at the following council meeting on the 16th, the council would be able to adopt a resolution by which they would be accepting your final report and declaring the criteria and procedures by which the council would be redrawing the council district boundaries after receipt of the results of the 2020 census of population. So that's the process through the March council meeting. And then we want to take it farther. As you know, in May of this year, we'll be holding our next municipal election. And we are expecting probably the greatest turnover on the City Council, and this sounds like an exaggeration, but I think it's factually accurate, in the last 100 years. Because I don't think since the City of Fort Worth adopted the council manager form of government that we've ever had a majority of the council, Ms. Kayser, turning over at any biennial election.
Not by election.
By election,
Yes,
right.
never had that.
We never had an election turning over a majority of the City Council. We know that at least 4 seats are going to turn over, 4 of the 9, and it's not inconceivable that 5 or 6 may turn over. A lot of change is likely to happen in the May election. That's significant because you have requested the opportunity to meet with the new City Council in August in a work session when you can explain your recommendations, and you'll have the opportunity to appeal to this largely new set of faces around the table about what you would like to see in the way of redistricting criteria and procedures. You'll recall at the very first meeting of the task force that Mayor Price agreed to schedule this joint work session, even though it turns out she's not going to be the mayor then, but it turns out that your distinguished chair, Ms. Miller, was prescient. She foresaw the need to have that kind of work session, and I don't think any of us would have realized back then how important the work session would become. So it's an opportunity for you to interact directly, face-to-face, with the new council about your recommendations. So it's a golden opportunity for you and for the city of Fort Worth. So by the end of July or the 1st of August, we expect to get block-level population data from the Census Bureau, by which we'll be able to redraw the council district boundaries. Until then, the best we can do is use some unofficial population estimates to train residents on the use of redistricting software, but we won't actually have the official population count in all likelihood until August. In fact, we've even heard rumors from some sources that we may not even get the data by then, but we're counting on the data to arrive by August of this year. And then we'd have a period of,
Fernando, let me add
yes,
something. Here.
Mr. Williams.
It's just something that's been on my mind, and it's crazy, but I'm going to say it anyway. Thinking in terms of what we are hearing about the data that we're supposed to be getting for the census.
In August, yes.
And we're not going to really, seemingly, probably won't get it probably until September sometime.
Well, you may be hearing different stories, yes. The official version is August, yes.
Okay, but I guess one of the things that
Could you be sure to use your microphone?
Okay.
Otherwise, the folks on the WebEx won't be able to.
okay. I guess one of the things that it's kind of bothering me about that in the fact of drawing these maps and things and not having the correct census and data. I just have a problem with us going through that process of trying to draw these, having these redistricting maps drawn, and you don't have the correct census.
You will have the correct census data by the time we start producing actual maps. We want to give our residents a head start, if you will. We know that there are many residents who are eager to start getting their hands on the software as soon as possible. We'll have access to the software. We're currently acquiring the software from Esri, the software provider. We should have it available for the public to use by April, probably mid to late April. And through Ms. Goot's office, we'll be scheduling a series of training sessions for the public. So any interested resident will be able to receive training in the use of the software, and will be able to use population estimates just for the training. But by August, or by whenever we receive the actual census data, then citizens will be able to start producing proposed maps using the actual data, not the estimates. So we will address your concern. Thank you, Mr. Williams. Very good point, because the estimates are only for training purposes, not for the actual production of maps. We'll have the actual data by the time we'll be producing those maps. So we had contemplated, and we've told you before, that we had expected the redistricting process to occur during a time frame from August to December. Actually, mid-November is when we need to complete the redistricting in order to meet a deadline set by the state for the voter registrar in each county to print and mail the voter registration cards to all registered voters in that county. Now, as we'll discuss a little later in this meeting, that's a very limited time frame of 3 months. We don't think that is enough time, and we're confident that you'll agree. 3 months is not enough time to conduct a thorough redistricting process that includes the kind of public participation that we've heard the task force say you want to see. If you want to have citizens, like Mr. Williams was just saying a moment ago, if you want to have citizens producing proposed maps for consideration by the city council, we need to allow at least a few weeks for that to happen. If you want to have public hearings that are well advertised, we need to allow at least a few weeks for that to happen. 3 months is probably just enough time for the council to do it on their own without involving the public. So it's a very tight time frame, and we'll talk with you about some solutions to that problem. So by December, the registrar would print and mail those voter registration cards. The next big deadline is mid-July, 180 days before qualifying begins for the May 2023 municipal election, when these new districts would go into effect. And that's a deadline in midsummer, when candidates would have to establish residency within the council districts that they wish to represent. Now, theoretically, we could extend redistricting beyond mid-July, but that would hardly be fair to prospective candidates who want to be sure that they reside legally in the district that they wish to represent. So you may view that as a reasonably hard deadline, mid-July of 2022. Mid-January to mid-February of 2023 is when candidates would file, just as they're currently filing. I think the current filing deadline for the 2021 election is February 12th, Ms. Kayser.
No, it's, yes. Is it Friday? Friday, 12th.
Friday, February 12th. And so a similar timeframe would apply to the 2023 election in 2 years. And then the election itself will be held in May of 2023. Next slide, please. And this is just a quick summary of the public participation in various task force activities. Your first 3 meetings back in the fall of 2020, the Redistricting 101 seminar, which drew over 2,500 Facebook views, and then the 3 public hearings. The first public hearing drew 2,900 Facebook views, almost 2,000 for the second one in Spanish, and another 2,500 for the third public hearing on January 21st. And perhaps even more significant, you see the number of speakers. We had a total of 20 speakers at your third public hearing, which was a good number, and you heard very thoughtful remarks from the residents who spoke at all the public hearings. Next slide, please. And as Ms. Gutt has explained to you, and as I don't think I need to remind you at all, there are at least 3 common themes that were expressed over and over in these public hearings. And the most common from those who did speak and from those who submitted written comments was the desirability of creating an independent redistricting commission. You also heard about the need for greater public participation. Residents want to be involved. And third, greater transparency. We don't want, at least the task force members and the folks who have been participating in this process have been saying, we don't want the council members to go into the back room and produce maps through a mysterious process. We want to know what they're doing. And if they change a proposed map, we want to know why they're making that change. So public participation and transparency are important themes in the various issues that we'll be presenting to you for your consideration today. Next slide, please. And so these are the 5 major issues to be addressed by the task force with respect to criteria and procedures. And we'd like to walk through each of the 5, describe the issue, describe a set of options, and then come back after we go over all of them, come back one by one, entertain any questions you might have, and take motions to approve one option or another with respect to each of these issues. Next slide, please. In respect to criteria, we'll be emphasizing the 3 that you see highlighted on the screen. We have a total of 10 proposed criteria that the task force endorsed at your November meeting. But there are 3 that task force members or members of the public have asked us to address further, and those are the 3 that we'd like to discuss with you at this time. Minority opportunity districts, communities of interest, and compactness. Next slide, please. So issue number 1, minority opportunity districts. I think this is a relatively easy issue to resolve, but we wanted to bring it to your attention just the same. Option A would be to retain the current draft language in your criteria. That is to create what we call minority opportunity districts in compliance with federal law to further reflect the growing diversity of our city. That's the exact language that the task force approved in November. Option B would retain that language, but would add the following sentences for clarification. And that is, such districts, minority opportunity districts, in which African Americans, Hispanics, and other minorities collectively represent 50% or more of the population, are intended to create opportunities for fair representation rather than to promote electoral outcomes. Electability is a function of many factors, including candidate qualifications, appeal to voters, voting age population, voter registration, and voter participation, as well as demographic characteristics. So the intent here is to make it clear to the council and to the public that you're not trying to assure any particular outcome. You're not trying to get a Hispanic elected from District 2. You're trying to make it possible for the residents of District 2 or any other district to elect whoever they believe best represents their interests. So you're not trying to assure an outcome, you're trying to provide opportunities for fair representation. And so that's option B, and option C would be to delete the criterion because it's not important to include. And so we can come back, if there are any quick questions, we'll be happy to answer them now. Otherwise, I would suggest we reserve the bulk of discussion for after we run through all of these issues. Next slide, please. Issue number 2 is communities of interest. And again, this is for clarification mostly. Option A is to retain the existing draft language, contain communities of interest in single districts with community of interest defined as a local population with shared socioeconomic characteristics and political institutions that would benefit from unified representation. That's a common definition of communities of interest. Option B would revise that draft language by adding a sentence. Communities of interest may include neighborhoods, groups of neighborhoods, school attendance zones, and similar geographic areas. So that's to clarify and illustrate what we mean by communities of interest. And it also acknowledges a comment by one of our council members, actually, to consider school attendance zones and school districts in drawing council district boundaries. Option C, in addition to option A or option B, and this is more of a procedure than a criterion, the procedure would be to enable residents through a registration process to self-identify communities of interest in the geographic boundaries of these communities. This process should occur between April and July before redistricting begins. So during that 4-month period, April through July, we'd have 2 things going on. We'd have training for the public in the redistricting software, and we'd have a widely publicized registration process for communities of interest. Now, we already have registered community organizations. We don't need to reinvent the wheel in that respect. But there may be communities of interest that are separate from recognized or registered community organizations. And we'll be able to identify them by providing this registration process whereby any interested group, for example, we heard from several folks representing the Riverside Alliance. The Riverside Alliance wants to be known as a community of interest and wants to be held intact in one council district, according to several of the speakers who spoke at our public hearings. Then this process gives them the opportunity to register as a community of interest. So when the city council draws the maps, and when any citizen draws the maps, they'll have a list of communities of interest with corresponding boundaries, so they'll know to recognize them to the degree possible in meeting this criterion about communities of interest. Any questions about issue number 2? Next slide, please.
Fernando, can you
Yes.
step back from the microphone just a little bit? You're
Am I too close?
You're too close, yeah.
Thank you.
Can step back, thank you.
Okay. Usually you're drawing people toward the microphone. Issue number 3. I don't know if we have any mathematicians around the table. If you're a mathematician, you will love issue number 3. If you don't love math, then we'll go through it quickly and provide you with some guidance. This has to do with defining compactness. Now, one of the options is that I know it when I see it. You can look at a map subjectively and determine whether or not you think it's compact. You don't have to have an objective measure. But one of the things that we've heard from the public is we ought to have an objective measure, at least as a goal, not as a legal requirement, but as a goal. And so we initially presented to you option A, which says compact districts with the goal of a Polsby-Popper ratio greater than or equal to 0.050 for each district. So that's a goal. And if you'll recall, there were two current council districts, 3 and 7, that don't even meet that goal. And they're not particularly compact, in part because we have such irregular city limit boundaries, but also in the case of District 7, because it wraps all the way around from the cultural district to Alliance and Texas Motor Speedway and even neighborhoods east of I-35. Now, we heard that we ought to be considering other potential compactness measures. And so we've done some research, and there are at least 6 others that we think are worthy of your consideration. And they're shown on the slides: Schwartzberg, REOC, convex hull, modified convex hull, which was brought to us by Mr. Ellison, Byron Ellison at your last public hearing, X-symmetry, and length width. Option C is to say, this is too much. We don't want to spend any more time on it. We'll ask staff to evaluate all the measures and recommend an appropriate one, and we'll go with whatever staff recommends, provided that the selected measure is reasonable. We don't want to paint ourselves into a corner or make it impossible to meet the criterion, and provided that it's understood to be a goal rather than a requirement. You will find, if you don't realize it already, that sometimes these criteria conflict with each other. And so the more compact you make a district, the harder it may be to create minority opportunity districts. The more you try to create minority opportunity districts, the less compact a district might be. So it's really a balancing act. You can't really maximize all the criteria at one time. And so we would treat it as a goal, and we'd set the standard so that it's relatively easy to meet. And finally, the fourth option is to go merely with subjective judgment. Don't try to objectify the compactness of these districts. Now, under option C, you see, in fact, it refers to the first 3 options, A, B, and C. One of the suggestions in respect to procedures is to provide that if any proposed district yields a compactness score that's beyond the range of presumed acceptability under the pertinent test that you select, then a detailed justification must be stated. And so, for example, you set the standard as a Polsby-Popper ratio of 0.050, and you decide, well, we can't meet that 0.050, then it would be a responsibility of the city council or whoever drafts the map to provide a detailed justification for not meeting the 0.050, and that may be entirely justifiable, but you just have to provide that justification. Next slide, please. Here's a set of definitions for those compactness measures. I won't take your time unless you want me to describe them, but each one has a mathematical definition making reference to different basic geometry. Next slide, please. And here's a set of maps and diagrams that illustrate the various compactness measures that we could consider using. Next slide, please. And here's a more detailed look at the modified convex hull ratio, which was brought to us by Mr. Ellison. And here you can see an example of the current Council District 4, represented by Councilor Moon, where you take the district area and divide it by the polygon area with no city limit penalty. So you can see District 4 seems to be not compact when you take into account the fact that Haltom City cuts into the middle of it. On the other hand, if you remove the city limit as a consideration, it's a highly compact district. And so if you have the modified convex hull ratio, at least in theory, it takes into account the fact that we have highly irregular city limit lines and takes that out as a factor. Now, whether the results are acceptable or not, we want to discuss in just a moment. Next slide, please. Now, if we may, Madam Chair, I'd like to entertain a 2-minute exercise with the task force and ask individual task force members to give us their subjective judgment in order to make a point. And so if I could get the attention of Ms. Scott, Tracy Scott, you know these council district boundaries well. If we were to ask you question number 1, in your subjective judgment, Ms. Scott, which current districts are the most compact? Which are the most compact districts on the map that you see on the screen? What would you say? Just intuitively. There's no right answer.
Okay. There's no right answer. Okay, so what is this, a brown color, light brown color?
So that's District 9. That's a district represented by...
9 is not the orange? Oh, that's 9.
Well, you're talking
Okay.
to somebody who's colorblind. You're right, the brown would be District 8. District 8 is represented by Ms. Gray.
Gosh, this is terrible. And who's light blue? Light blue is 7?
Light blue is 7.
Geez, that's a horrible, terrible look.
Okay, so you think that maybe 8 or 9 would be the most compact?
Yes, and that's purely guessing.
Okay,
honestly.
well,
Yeah.
this is the kind of guesswork that people have to do when it's a purely subjective process. Now, let me ask Mr. Espino, taking a look at the same map, which would you say are the least compact districts?
7 spread out everywhere, and 3, you've already, they're like spread out everywhere. So I would say 7 for sure is the least compact.
7 is the least compact.
Then I would say 3 is up there.
And maybe 3
Yeah.
thereafter. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Scott and Mr. Espino, for participating. That's important because I want you to remember what they just said, and let's see which objective measure produces compactness scores that most closely align with your subjective judgment. This is a reality check, a check based upon your intuition. If the score doesn't produce something that's intuitively sensible, then it's probably not a good measure. Next slide, please. So here's a table that shows the compactness scores of the different council districts with respect to the different compactness measures. And what do you see here? For example, 4 of the measures tell us that District 7 is the least compact. So you might say those are probably 4 measures that we ought to consider. Polsby-Popper, Schwartzberg, convex hull, and asymmetry. Surprisingly, the modified convex hull does not tell us that it's one of the least compact. And so which measures show us that District 9 is the most compact? Well, there are 2 of them, Polsby-Popper and Schwartzberg. And there are 2 that tell us that District 2 is the most compact, Rioch and convex hull. District 8 is the most compact according to the X symmetry, which is actually the most complex of the different measures. And so it would be nice if there was a single measure that stands out as obviously better than all the others, but there's not. There's not one perfect measure of compactness as it pertains to the existing city council districts. We just have to pick one and go with it with the understanding that it's not going to be perfect. And so I don't know that there's anything better than Polsby-Popper, although Schwartzberg may be just as good. And some of the others may be worth consideration as well. And so these are scores that we ought to consider in deciding which measure we want to select. And once we select that measure, establish the standard. So for example, in Polsby-Popper, we said 0.050, which would have disqualified District 7 and District 3. If we were to choose Schwartzberg, which is inversely related to compactness, the higher the score, the less compact, then we would probably say something like a score of 5 or less would be acceptable. A score of greater than 5 would not be acceptable unless we could provide good justification for it. Next slide, please.
Yeah, Fernando,
Yes, Mr. Williams.
I guess I'm just confused about this, because it seemed like, and I have to go back to the 80s when we did this back then. We had the person from University of Texas at Arlington, I've forgotten the guy's name, but he worked with us on doing the redistricting as far as the districts concerned, because we wanted to look at the population. And I guess that's one reason that I'm a little confused about the fact, since we're not going to really have the data. And I guess what I'm thinking, aren't these districts supposed to be drawn based upon the numbers rather than thinking in terms of cultural things? I was under.
They will be based upon population at the block level. Yes, sir.
And I guess that's, to me,
It's strictly population.
okay. So therefore, my thinking would be that if that's, I want to just say, if we come up with 1 million people in this, in Fort Worth,
Yes.
then you want to go back and then you have to divide that.
We're going to have like 900,000 population, and we'll divide it by 10 districts. So each district will need to have approximately 90,000, no more than 5% above, no more than 5% below that average figure.
That's what I'm thinking. So a lot of this, what I'm hearing us discussing is, I don't know, is it irrelevant? to
Yes,
that?
it's relevant that you have proposed 10 criteria. The very first and arguably the most important criterion is roughly equal populations.
Right.
Now, you can meet that test in all kinds of ways, but that's not the only criterion you want to have. That's not the only goal you want to set. You want to promote minority opportunity districts. You want to respect geographic boundaries, on and on. And so you've listed others. Now, you've said, and you may want to reaffirm it today, that the top 5 criteria are the most important, and the other 5 criteria are less important. So that gives some guidance to the map drawers about what you consider to be most worthy of their attention. So population is arguably the most important factor, but not the only factor. Okay, next slide, please. Issue number 4, public participation. Option A, staff provides software training for interested residents, analyzes redistricting plans submitted by residents, and briefs the city council. And there would be more detailed provisions that will publish by the end of March a schedule of classes that will conduct for interested residents in the use of the S3 redistricting software. Residents will be able to download the software and use it on their private computers. And we will specify the hardware and software requirements for using this software on their private computers. Residents will also be able to use the software on public computers available at designated libraries and community centers. So we would be making the software available broadly to all interested residents of Fort Worth and providing them with the training they need to use that software effectively. Option B, in addition to that process, the City Council would conduct a virtual or hybrid public hearing before it begins to redraw the district boundaries, and a similar public hearing after it has produced a proposed map. Now, an offshoot of option B might be to have 2 public hearings before redistricting begins and 2 public hearings after. Option C, and we heard this from some of the public hearing participants, in addition to the activities described in option A, the council conducts a series of 8 or more virtual or hybrid public hearings, at least 1 for each council district, before it begins to redraw district boundaries, and a similar series of 8 or more public hearings after it has reduced a proposed map. Now, that's a lot of hearings. That may be too much, but that's for you to decide. We've even heard, and we didn't put it down on this slide because we didn't think it was realistic, but some have suggested that we have not only 8 public hearings, 1 per council district, but also 1 per community of interest. Now, there literally could be dozens of communities of interest. So having one hearing in each one would seem to be somewhat impractical. The task force held 3 public hearings, and you know how much effort went into those. So we don't take these public hearings lightly. Ms. Kayser loves public hearings, but she's not going out of her way to have more and more of those hearings unless they're going to be productive. So we want to be sure that public hearings are productive, not have any more than we really need to hear from the public. Next slide, please. Issue number 5 is transparency. Option A, the council conducts 1 or more public hearings before it begins to redraw the boundaries and after it's produced a proposed map, which is essentially what we just discussed in respect to issue number 4. Option B, the council conducts all deliberations about redistricting in official meetings. They won't be drawing maps in the back room. Any map drawing has to occur in a legally advertised official meeting of the Fort Worth City Council, subject to all provisions of the Texas Open Meetings Act, properly advertised 3 days in advance and so forth. Option C goes a step further, and that is to require any communications about map drawing among city council members to occur in official meetings with any relevant computer screen visible to the council and public observers. Now, you'll see later on in one of the motions by Mr. Schur that he goes even deeper into some of these procedures. But for now, we want to get the benefit of your guidance about these options for transparency. Next slide, please. Now, there are 3 other issues that we think are relevant to redistricting criteria and procedures. We want to bring them to your attention. The first 2 are relatively straightforward and shouldn't take much of your time at all. First, should we exclude party affiliation, Democrat or Republican, from any demographic data available in the redistricting software? I'm not sure party affiliation is even included in the demographic data, but the point is not to have it for the public to use. That's the first issue. Second, under the identifiable geographic boundaries criterion, should we specify that to the extent possible, dwelling units that are located on opposite sides of the same residential streets shall be assigned to the same districts? You will remember hearing from the public that they didn't want to see a residential street serve as the boundary between council districts so that neighbors across the street from each other in the same neighborhood would be in different council districts. So issue number 2 is just that point of clarification for the geographic boundaries criterion. Number 3 is a little bit trickier, and we can describe this to you. How should we deal with the time constraints associated with the December 2021 voter registration card printing deadline? Next slide, please. So we can go a little deeper into that question. You'll recall we mentioned a little earlier that by December, the voter registrar must print and mail the voter registration cards with information about new council districts so that you will know in advance of the next election in which districts you're eligible to vote. Not just city council district, but the voter registration card tells you about all the electoral districts. School board, county commissioner, state legislature, Senate and House, U.S. Congress, all of those districts are identified in your voter registration card. You need that information in order to make an informed decision about voting. The election code says that on or after November 15th, but before December 6th of each odd-numbered year, that is 2021, the registrar of each county shall issue a voter registration certificate, a card that you get in the mail, to each voter in the county whose registration is effective on the preceding November 14th. So November 14th is really the hard deadline to finish redistricting so that we can supply that information to the voter registrar's office. Now, we did talk with the office. In fact, Ms. Kayser forwarded to us an email communication. Quote, the idea is to get those cards in the hands of voters in time for the March primary, March 1st, 2022. If there's a delay, the bigger question is if the date of the primary would be affected. If the answer is no, then I would still like to hear what the Secretary of State has to say about it. The printing and mailing of certificates cost around $400,000 for Tarrant County. That's not an insubstantial figure. So I would want to avoid having to reprint them to make an adjustment. You don't want to print them twice if you don't have to. If you have to, you have to. But that's a $400,000 in taxpayer funds that we would want to save if possible. Knowing that all the activities from the census are delayed, this was all caused by COVID, I don't think Fort Worth is the only entity that will be in the situation. Every elected body will be in the very same situation across the state of Texas. I would not be surprised if, like in 2012, the primaries are delayed. Now, it depends on who you want to listen to. Some folks will tell you there's no question the primaries will be delayed. Other folks will tell you there's no way the primaries will be delayed. So I don't know whether the primaries will be delayed, but that is an issue. Next slide, please. And so here are three options for your consideration as a task force to deal with the time constraints associated with that December 2021 voter registration card printing deadline. Option A, shorten the time frame for local redistricting to 3 months by reducing the amount of time allocated to public participation, which is map drawing and public hearings. I'm not sure that's going to be a very popular option, but that is an option. Option B is to print and mail the voter registration cards in December of 2021 as scheduled, and again next year in 2022 after local redistricting, which would be somewhat costly to taxpayers, but perhaps a cost worth incurring to promote public participation. Option C is to postpone the printing deadline, which is politically complex, postpone the deadline by a few weeks, maybe 4 or 5 weeks, through the holidays without affecting the March 1st, 2022 primary elections, or postponing the printing deadline by what we hypothetically would want, 3 months, and postponing the primary elections, which may be politically unpopular. I don't think many prospective candidates want to postpone the March 1st primary election date. Yes, sir. Mr. Espino.
Yes, obviously, in addition to city council redistricting, the state of Texas, they're going to have a special session. Typically, when those maps are drawn, there's also normally, I'm not aware of any redistricting where the state of Texas has not been sued under the Voting Rights Act. So you're right, back in 2012, we had primaries not in March, but much later.
It was in May.
It was in May, and then there were runoffs. They were like in July, I think, June or July. Yeah, it was in July. So there's a lot of uncertainty there, and I don't know if the city of Fort Worth determines whether the primaries are going to be on time. It's going to be a function of, A, does the state finish their redistricting, and then if there's litigation, what that does to the timeline.
Exactly right. This is not our call. Now, we may have some influence, but it's not our call. It affects every jurisdiction in the state. It just happens that, in many ways, Fort Worth is ahead of the curve because we have this task force. We're not aware of any other city in Texas that has a redistricting task force like this one, recommending criteria and procedures. But Mr. Espino is exactly right. This is not our call. This is a state issue. We can deal with the issue locally by option A or B. If we want to consider option C, then the results are out of our hands.
Like option B, but we'll talk about that later. Maybe the cost to bear, where you print them in December and then again after the redistricting.
Then you reprint it after redistricting. That's right.
Could you identify or give us like a ballpark? Like when I hear might be extra, I don't know if you're saying 50 grand or
$400,000 for Tarrant County.
There
now,
you go.
Tarrant County may say, Fort Worth, we want you to pay 40% because you have 40% of the population. So I'm not going to say that's insignificant.
right.
But relative to a budget over $1 billion, it's not going to break the bank.
Right.
I had a question on that one also. It's my understanding that the only cards that have to be reprinted are those in which there has been a change of boundaries of a registered voter. And so I
Yes,
think
sir.
that
That's correct. That's correct.
So I think the number, anything that is caused by the city of Fort Worth will only result from those from those registered voters who are moved from one district number to a different district number. We know that will be at least 20% of the registered voters. We don't know how many there will be. And I understand, although this is very unofficially, that the approximate cost per card is 29 cents. I don't know if that figure is reliable or not, but I do think the numbers, 400,000 for the entire county is one thing, but for that limited subset might be a lot lower for people in Fort Worth who've registered to vote and have changed numbers, district numbers.
That is correct with respect to the city. However, I would point out that county government is going to be dealing with the same question of time constraints. The city of Arlington and all the other municipalities in Tarrant County are going to be dealing with the same time constraints. All the school districts, and there are actually 16 school districts that serve residents of Fort Worth, all the school districts are going to be dealing with the same time constraints. They may not be able to meet the 3-month deadline either. And so there may be good reason to believe that we're going to have to reprint all the cards whether we want to or not. Because it's an unrealistic time constraint that affects every jurisdiction in the state of Texas. Okay, so those are your options. Next slide, please. And so if we were to go with option C and seek to postpone the printing deadline, then we would recommend that we move the deadline 3 months. That would give us plenty of time to complete our work. Move the deadline from November 15th to February 15th, from December 6th to March 6th for 2022, based upon the residence of each voter as of February rather than November of this year. But that's only if we go with option C. If we go with A or B, then we're not even thinking about postponing the printing deadline. And the smiling figure on the slide is our governor, to whom we would have to appeal to postpone the primary election in which he may be running for re-election. So that'll give you a sense as to the popularity of option C. Next slide, please. And so just to give you a summary of the hypothetical redistricting schedule going forward from today, we'll ask you to review a draft final report that we would provide you by February 12th. We'd ask you to submit any minority report by the 19th. We're going to the council in March. The council will take some action to approve whatever criteria and procedures they consider to be appropriate. They may accept all your recommendations. They may accept only some of them. But they would be acting, we anticipate, by means of a resolution on March 16th. And that would allow us to proceed with that 4-month period, as I mentioned earlier, software training and registration of communities of interest. We then had the May election. We'd get the census data by the end of July, 1st of August, and then we'd have that joint work session for the task force members and the newly seated city council to talk about your recommendations. Next slide, please. And then the next council would begin the actual redistricting process based upon your joint work session. They would allow as much as 2 months for residents to prepare and submit their redistricting plans. That's an important component, critical component of the public participation process. Staff would then analyze the plans and brief the council. Staff at that point might prepare, as we did last time around, might prepare a starter map. You always want to have a starter map that you begin to modify, but you have to have some starting point. And that would be probably a map prepared by staff, but it could be a map prepared by any citizen. If an innocent citizen submits a map that is brilliant, that meets all the criteria and appeals to everybody's interest, then we might adopt that map as the starter map. So that would be the process that occurs in August and September. October would be devoted to public hearings, and then November and December would be when the council actually draws the maps with an appropriate level of transparency. In the past, it's been done proverbially in the back room. We'll want to see what degree of transparency you want to provide. And then in January, you'd come back with another round of public hearings, 1 or 2 perhaps, and then adopting the final council district map, with March being the time frame for reprinting the voter registration cards if we go with option C. If we go with option B, then we can reprint any time up until November of the year. but the earlier the better, because we want to be sure that people are able to vote with accurate information in a timely way. Again, mid-July, qualifying for residency, filing for the ballot in January and February 2023, and then the May 2023 election. Next slide, please. And here we stop and see if you have any general questions, and if not, Madam Chair, we would like to walk through these 8 issues one by one. At the end of each issue, answer any questions, entertain any discussion, and take a motion as to which of the options the task force would like to recommend to the Fort Worth City Council. After we get through those 8 issues, then we turn the floor back over to our esteemed chair, and she might recognize Mr. Schur for his 10 motions that follow. So if it's in order, I'd like to walk through the 8 issues one by one.
Great. And before you do that, Task Force, I hope the hypothetical redistricting schedule, the February through August 2021, and the hypothetical redistricting schedule for August 2021 through May 2023, that we would put in our procedures so that the council actually knows this is what we would like for you to do, consider. Those of you on WebEx, Mr. Shore, Mr. DeVito, Mr. Bradshaw, Ms. Scott, Sayala. It's just a suggestion because I think we need to, lack of a better word, to codify it, if that's, but to make sure that it's really there in front of them so they can see that's what we would like to recommend as a procedure.
So
All right,
let me be sure we capture that. In fact, this may be a good time to entertain the first motion. You're looking at slides number 26 and 27.
Yes.
And you're saying that those 2 slides, or the information that appears on those slides, ought to be reflected in your final report and ought to be included in the resolution that the council approves, establishing the criteria and procedures for redistricting.
Well, we're going to have to take a
motion.
motion on the,
Right.
yeah, but,
And I'm wondering if now would be a good time to entertain a motion to that effect.
My question is just whether we're there yet, because it's probably going to depend on how many public hearings we're recommending and on the print, how we come down on that question. So we may have to decide some of those things first before but I agree with you that at the end of this, we should codify our schedule. I just don't think we've decided on that part yet.
Ms. Kennedy? Okay. Anybody? Let me go to the WebEx folks. Anybody with a comment there?
I agree with the idea of codifying a schedule as a suggested schedule. I think that there are too many variables in what's going on that it's going to be something that we would propose as a fixed schedule. And I also agree that it's premature until we decide some of these other issues.
Okay. Mr. Spino?
Yeah, I was going to agree that it's, we need to go through these other issues, specifically the issue of the Independent Redistricting Commission, because that would change or the wording of the schedule. And we got to leave, we have to go through all these issues before we can agree.
Groovy smoothie. Let's
Very good.
move forward. Okay.
All those comments make good sense. Okay, so if I could ask Melissa, please, to go back to slide number 12. Issue number 1, minority opportunity districts. We're prepared to entertain any questions, and if you have no questions, we would entertain a motion in support of option A or B or C or some variation of those options.
Anybody with Ms. Kennedy?
Is there a way to combine the wording of option A and B?
Yes, they would be combined. Option B is in addition to option A. So option B would encompass option B would encompass option A.
I'd like to make a motion that we accept option B.
Second.
Been properly moved and second. All in favor, vote by raising your hand.
Aye.
I got a comment before we vote. Can I
Oh,
go
sure.
make a
Mr.
comment?
Bradshaw,
Yes.
go ahead.
On option B, I believe it should say 50% or more of the voting age population. I think that's how it's reflected in the Supreme Court decision on that. It's not just the population.
Tell me where you are, Mr. Bradshaw.
It's,
Which
if you
option?
look on the third line of option B, it says such districts in which African Americans, Hispanics, and other minorities collectively represent 50% or more of the voting age population. I think Mr. Bradshaw is suggesting that we insert the word voting age before the word population to make clear that we want 50% or more of the adults, not just of the general population, to constitute a minority opportunity district.
Ms. Kennedy?
I thought when we discussed the legal part of this, that Ms. Guzman explained to us that minority opportunity districts were based on the total population. Could we get just clarification? I just want to make sure that we're doing the right thing legally.
No, the minority opportunity districts are calculated on voting age population. All other districts are total population.
Okay.
Then we definitely need to add that for clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Bradshaw. Any other?
I guess, could I just ask a question? I mean, I like the idea of us creating minority opportunity districts. My concern is, we're not saying that it, well, that it, is it that that it has to have a population, a voting population, or that it may have a voting age population? I guess my concern is that that could be used to pack districts, and whereas if we have opportunities to create, I mean, the minority population in our city is fairly concentrated, and my concern would be that we would end up packing into 2 or 3 districts all the minority population, and thus really, when we might have an opportunity, if we did 40% to, I'm just wondering how that works.
Yeah, remember when we create minority opportunity districts, you really get down into the minutia of the data, and you're comparing how the minority group votes as compared to the non-minority group. So, I mean, there's a lot that goes into creating the district, and the goal of creating the district is, by the way that you form it, you're essentially assured that you're not doing the packing, because packing is actually diluting the ability of the minority group to elect the candidate of its choice. So just by the virtue of the way you form these districts, that's not going to occur.
I'll trust you on that because I don't know otherwise. So, okay, that was my only concern with the number 50%.
Any other discussion?
This is Teresa. I have a quick question, please.
Yeah.
Teresa, Mr.
Yes.
You want-
That's right, let her go ahead.
Go ahead, Ms. Ayala.
Oh, yes. The question I had is where it says, if we were to insert the language 50%, let's see, or more of the voting population, what is the date of that? What is that date based on, the voting population as of?
As of the census of population, the 2020 census.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Williams?
Yeah, my comment primarily is dealing with the fact that I don't want to see any districts that's been packed. I want to see, take these numbers, and when you go and look at the percentages that you're supposed to have.
Mr. Williams, speaking to your mic.
Oh.
There you go.
That you look at the percentages that you're supposed to have, then I guess that's what my concern is. I want to make sure that these are equally divided, and you're not looking at any particular race, period. But you're looking at numbers. And wherever the numbers fall, then that's where the districts fall. And just as long as you have them equally divided and with the numbers, and wherever they fall, that to me is what I want to see, not packed any place. But every person has a right to be in that particular area where the lines fall. And wherever the line falls, then that's the district that you're in.
Mr. Williams and Task Force members, if I could refer you to page 11, slide 11, and the first two criteria. The first one is the one that we discussed with Mr. Williams earlier, approximately equal size. And the second is about packing, compliance with the U.S. Constitution, Voting Rights Act, Texas Constitution, other applicable laws with no packing of minority voters, no fragmentation of minority communities, and no retrogression in the ability of minorities to participate in the electoral process. So packing, as you'll know, is the process of over-concentrating minorities so as to minimize the number of districts in which they represent a majority of the voting age population. Cracking is the process of diluting minority voting strengths by spreading minorities just below the 50% mark so that they have a very hard time gaining a majority of the vote. So you want to avoid both extremes. You want to avoid packing, and you want to avoid cracking or fragmentation of minority communities. And that's all included in criteria number 2. Those are the top 2 criteria. So good question.
Great.
So I think, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
Mr. Allen.
No, I was just going to say, are we then back to our motion or?
I had a comment if I'd like to make.
Go ahead, Mr. Stewart.
Yeah, I think we could resolve the conflict between the potential or perceived conflict between 2 and 3 by saying that subject to the criteria 1 and 2, create minority opportunity districts. So that would make it clear that the attempts to make minority opportunity districts could not be used to pack or fragment.
Yeah, I think if we have them in a priority order, which we've established, and each criteria is being considered in that order, I don't think we need to restate previous criteria in each new criteria. It gets really confusing. So
they're not stated. They're not in any order of priority according to the slide.
Right. It says
yes,
you have the top 5, you have the bottom 5. So the top 5 are not in any particular order.
Ms. Guzman and then Ms. Kennedy.
Okay.
Yes, I think that a lot of the concern is taken care of by the phrase that we came up with at a previous meeting in option A, where it talks about in compliance with federal law. It's not in compliance with federal law to do packing or cracking. And then the other suggestion that I would just put forward, and you all can do with it as you will, is you really don't need the language that's in that, it's not a parenthetical, whatever you would call it, between the dashes, because that is how you create it. And so, I mean, I think maybe that's causing some consternation and it's just not necessary language. So the goal, as I understood it, of including language in option B was to talk about outcomes. I think you can talk about outcomes without getting as specific as that first portion is. So that's another option that you could consider.
Ms. Kennedy?
I feel like part of what we're doing here is not only putting things on paper in their most legalistic way, but we also want to put things on here so that every one of our neighbors understands what we mean by this and what our outcome is for our city, so that people who don't know the legalities of this, who don't understand what packing and cracking and fragmentation mean, but when they read what 3 says with option B in it, they will understand what our goal is as far as creating minority opportunity districts, that we're not trying to take away the opportunity from any minority group, but we're also not trying to predetermine any council district seats. And I think that this says that to the people in our city.
I agree.
Mr. DeVito, does that work for you?
I like option B with the addition of Mr. Bradshaw's suggestion for a voting age population. I think it covers any concern that I have.
Any other concerns?
So to be clear, the motion then before the floor was made by Ms. Scott to add option B, but now amended to reflect
Yes.
voting age population
reflect.
with my second. Okay.
Yes.
And you did
Do I
not
need to
accept
say all
Mr.
of that,
Scher's
or are we
language.
okay?
Sorry.
Are we all clear of the motion?
Yeah, now we need to vote on it.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to make
Vote
sure
on, yeah.
you
Does
did
it
not
need to be
accept Mr.
restated?
Scher's language,
That's what I'm asking.
subject to
No,
criteria number
because-
1 and number 2 as unnecessary.
Unless we vote
Unnecessary.
down this motion, then we could come back and create a new motion with that language.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, now we need to take a record vote,
Do
I
I need
guess.
to restate the motion?
Yes,
I think so.
please do.
Okay. I amend my motion to combine, to this, combining A and B, but including voting more of the voting population. So adding the word voting before population. I
Voting
move to
age.
approve.
Voting age.
You mean voting age?
Voting age.
Okay, great.
Did I
All
say
in
voting
favor?
population? Voting age population.
And I second
Okay,
that.
thank you.
Mr. Espino, you second?
Yes.
It's all been properly moved and second. All those in favor, would you vote by
Aye.
raising your hand? All right, great. Thank you.
There we go.
All right.
Madam Chairwoman, before you go to the issue number 2 and next voting, I am going to have to step away. And so I just wanted to say that I'm glad we got to this one. This was one of the more important things for me to make sure I am very much in favor of communities of interest. And then I know that the task force will continue to do good work, even though I'm stepping away from the meeting. And I will see you all at the March 2nd when we present our final report. Thank you. Well, one day. That's why I'm going to.
Okay, so we will not include subject to criteria number 1 and 2 in that language. Hearing no motion to that effect, we can move on to issue number 2. Communities of interest. And again, this is just adding a sentence. Communities of interest may include neighborhoods, groups of neighborhoods, school attendance zones, and other geographic areas, to explain further what we mean by communities of interest and to respond to various comments from residents who said, we want you to recognize neighborhoods, groups of neighborhoods like neighborhood alliances and school attendance zones as examples of communities of interest. So it would be in order to entertain a motion to that effect if.
We include option B.
Okay.
Yeah.
I motion to approve. Are we making a motion?
Yeah.
Mr. Scher.
And bear in mind that option C adds to it the registration process. So you could take them as 2 motions or as 1.
What's your pleasure? We've got one motion on the floor that's been seconded by Mr. Norris has offered and Mr. Williams second, and that's for option B. Okay, Mr. Shore?
Yeah. I'm in favor of option B, and I would like option C to be considered separately as an addition.
Okay, is there a second to that? Are you offering a motion or just making a comment? And we'll do it.
The question was asked whether we were going to consider these together or separately. And I'm just making the comment that I would like to make a motion on option C, but I would like to rule on B first.
Okay. All in favor of option B on issue 2 of the communities of interest, would you vote by raising your hand and aye?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. All right, now we're at option C. Mr. Shore?
Yes. Option C, I believe, would be a valuable addition. There had been some, there are, as Mr. Costa said, there are a lot of communities of interest that simply are not registered, do not appear on any demographic maps. For example, in the neighborhood across the river from us, the Brookside neighborhood, it's not a registered neighborhood association, but they are a community of interest. And if they wanted to identify, this would allow them to identify. Also, there are the neighborhood alliances. Some are registered with the city, some are not. But there may be even larger groups that want to be considered that are larger than the neighborhood alliances. A question had been raised about whether this process should occur between April and July before redistricting begins, and whether that would limit the ability of communities to draw maps to protect themselves in some way. And I think the answer to that is no. It's just a matter of getting identifiable chunks into the databases for everybody to see. And I suppose that they could, we're saying the word should, that does not mean that if someone came in later, their request could not be added. So with that said, I move that we adopt option C.
Is there?
I have a question.
Yeah. Ms. Scott?
So in option A, communities of interest are not defined by any form of anything formal or any registration. So how are communities of interest, how is that designated now? Because to add C would say there's a registration process and they have to self-identify. Did the others identify at some point in time?
If I could answer that question, right now, we can use basic information about registered community organizations. For example, if we know that the Fairmount neighborhood is well-defined, they're well-organized, they have a neighborhood organization, they have issues that are unique to Fairmount, then that would be a community of interest. And we know that, but we may not know about other communities of interest, and we want to give people, as Mr. Schur has just explained, the opportunity to register so that when we start drawing maps, we know that information. Otherwise, it's largely subjective and subject to self-identification.
Kennedy and then Mr. Williams.
Thank you.
I think option C is an important procedure, but it feels more like a procedure than a
It is a procedure, it's not a
criteria.
criterion.
So I think we need to move that to our conversation on.
It would be, the criteria and procedures are actually intermingled among these issues. Some of the issues are all criteria, some are all procedures, and some are a mix. This is the mix.
I'm chairman of the Bunch Elephant Club. We've been an organization since.
That would be a community of interest.
Since 1963, which is what we have here. But I guess though the cross 820, there's a group of which have started becoming one.
Carver Heights,
But, yeah,
east.
But the thing is, right to my right from my house, there's another group. But this what we have said here is it's not stopping anybody from.
It's not stopping, you don't have to register to be
Yeah.
considered a community of interest. It's just an opportunity, an additional opportunity for folks to self-identify and to register so that we don't forget to consider you.
Yeah.
But no one's going to forget the Bunch Ellington Club.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is I'm trying to see what's the big different deal here when he said that you have to, through this group, they can register anytime they get ready and be part.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's.
This is just another option. This is not exclusive. you will be a community of interest whether you're registered or not.
And who do we register to?
You would register probably with communications and public engagement, just as they register neighborhood organizations
Yes,
today.
Neighborhood association, neighborhood organization here. Who controls it here is who you register with.
That's correct.
Yeah.
In fact, I would say we administer it more than control it. We try not to control neighborhoods. Neighborhoods are totally independent, voluntary organizations. We just recognize them.
So, Mr. Espino?
Yeah, and I guess for me, I have no problem with adding option C also, because the way I look at it, growing up in the north side, we have neighborhood associations. There's a North Side Neighborhood Association, the far greater North Side Historical, and the Diamond Hill, but then there's a historic community there by Meacham Airport known as Loma or La Loma neighborhood. They're not a registered neighborhood, but they would be a community of interest that would want to be considered together. So makes perfect sense to me.
So is this an opportunity for the folks, like the 3 folks that have called me to say, I live in a certain section of Meadowbrook, and for the last 20 years, our neighborhood has been left out, our section of our neighborhood is left out, or people who just really want to be heard. That doesn't guarantee, though, that whatever they suggest or want to do is going to be done. But at least they will have the opportunity to be heard. Ms. Good?
We do have something in place right now. It started with registering neighborhood associations and homeowners associations. We have expanded that, so we also have a category for faith-based organizations, which includes churches and organizations within churches and synagogues and other religious organizations. But we also have a community organizations category, so we could very easily, if a group didn't want to register like the neighborhood associations have to register, which is a little bit more cumbersome, we could add a separate category so that groups could identify as communities of interest, and then we would have that information as part of that overall database.
Who makes up the registration? They would just go to your website?
We do. We have a process in place, but like I said, we would have to probably add a category to accomplish this, but it's basically the same structure, so it would be something that we could do. And the other thing we do is we communicate with those groups on a weekly basis, so once they identify, we'd be able to have regular communications with them as well.
What happens if it's just an individual, not a group?
We currently have the ability on our website to, within our GovDelivery email system, to add categories and topics. So we could add a redistricting topic to that, and then that would allow individuals and organizations to register to get information, and we would have that information to use for the redistricting effort.
Any more discussion, Task Force? We prepared to vote?
Well, did someone make a second? I know Mr. Schur made the motion, right?
He made his motion. Was there?
I'll second it. This is Teresa Ayala.
Ms. Ayala seconds. All in favor?
Yes.
Would you raise your hand?
Aye.
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 Okay. The motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Issue 3 on slide 14 is compactness. And again, we talked about the poultry popper ratio, which is the measure that you initially suggested for consideration, with 0.050 being the minimum goal. You did not set that as a firm requirement. And then you've got the other options. You can choose any of those. You can determine whether to turn it over to staff, and you can decide to go with the "I know it when I see it" test.
Yeah, this was the geeky part of this. Compactness can be subjective. There should be objective measures. I personally don't have a problem with staff looking at it. I mean, you start talking about Polsby, Popper, and Schwarzenberg, Riyadh, convicts, modified. I mean, it gets pretty technical. I don't think it needs to be that technical. I think staff can do the technical homework and then make a recommendation. And then there's still going to be some subjective element, because even if you come up with a method and a score, we're still going to know it when we see it, right? Because you'll be able to tell the district looks gerrymandered and is not compact. So I guess I'll go ahead and put it out there. I'd make a motion that we adopt option C.
Is there a second? And
Second.
by
Go
Ms.
ahead,
Scott? Okay, any further discussion?
Option C.
So is that the language that would actually appear that, or will staff just pick
The
one
language
and
that
then?
would actually appear would be whatever the staff recommends. And I would say that based upon the data appearing in slide number 19, and based upon your discussion about those data, that Polsby Popper is probably as good a measure as any. And so if you go with option C, you're effectively going with option A.
Well, I mean, you're saying compact districts with staff evaluating the appropriate compact measure and recommended measure. I mean, you have to have compactness as a criteria, and then the actual evaluation measure is what staff's going to recommend, right? I mean, that's what, the way I understand option C. You got to have compact districts, and staff looks at the measures and recommends the appropriate measure for compactness. You
Yes.
got to have compactness, period.
Yes.
But there's not much difference between Schwartzberg and,
What's the difference between?
But this is for our criteria. So not each district as we go along.
No. This is general criteria that would apply to all of them. You can't pick and choose.
You're just going to pick, we're going to pick one.
You pick one, you apply it across the board.
Okay,
You're
and you're-
stuck with whatever you pick.
And you're telling us that staff is probably going to
Polsby
stick with
Popper is
Polsby
probably as
Popper.
good as any. There's no perfect measure.
Okay.
You could go with Schwartzberg, and that would be fine. Again, think about the extent to which each measure provides scores that align with your intuitive judgment. You've told us that District 7, for example, is the least compact. So you ought to focus on those measures that show that District 7 is the least compact. You told us that District 9 or District 8 are most compact. Which measures are showing that those are most compact? So by those determinations, I would say that Polsby Popper or Schwartzberg would probably be the most appropriate.
Williams?
What is the basic difference between option A and option C?
Option A is specific to that particular measure. Option C is you can't decide, the data are inconclusive, staff needs to do more homework.
But
I
option
think the
A-
data are sufficiently conclusive that you can make a decision to go with either option A or one of the alternative measures.
Option A is the one that,
That seems to align most closely with your subjective judgment.
okay, but I'd like to make a motion that we accept.
Well, there's a motion on the floor.
Yeah, the only thing, Fernando, is we're looking at existing maps. We don't know what the future.
We don't know
maps-
what the future maps are going to
this-
do. This is just an example.
Yeah. So
Now,
that-
once we start looking at the future maps, they may give us different results.
That's what I'm saying. You don't know what the future maps look like,
So we
so.
need to establish the criteria before we draw those future maps.
I guess what my concern is, the maps that to be drawn should follow what we've already recommended, how they should be drawn.
That's correct. That's correct. Now, you may not like the outcome once we apply Polsby Popper to the future maps, but you can't change the rules after you play the game.
Mr. Shore?
I view all of these compactness measures as being more like procedural red flags. In other words, you could run, when the new districts are drawn, you could run these measures of compactness, every one of them on all of the districts. And after doing that, see if there are any of them that yield anything that looks like a red flag. So I think staff can evaluate all of the compactness measures themselves and determine from looking, at all of them in the same context of what, we've already come up with, are listed here. if there's anything, any of these tests yield a number that looks like a red flag, I think that's when things should be explained. I don't know what the numbers would be for any of these particular tests other than the Polsby Popper. That's the only one we've been given a number for. And this number, I am told, is so small that it's meaningless. So
It's a very low number. But it's not meaningless because there are 2 districts that don't even meet that low number.
yeah.
Okay. We have a motion on the floor, and we need a second? Okay. For option C. Mr. Norris, you're? No, I was voting. Oh, okay. All right.
Aye.
For option C, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Raise your hand.
I'll vote that way, but
Mr.
numbers,
Bradshaw, any opposers? You opposed, Mr. Bradshaw? You opposed? Is this the mic on?
Yes. I'm not in the minority, and that's fine.
Okay. Thank you.
Madam Chairman,
Yes.
numbers don't lie, but people do.
Okay. All right.
And so before we advance on issue number 3, you've just approved option C, which is to delegate to staff the responsibility to select an option, a measure. But you'll notice under options A, B, and C, and you've chosen C, there is a procedural component in addition to the criteria component. The procedural component is if a proposed district yields a compactness score that's beyond the range of presumed acceptability under the pertinent test, then a detailed justification must be stated. So if for example, we use Polsby Popper and we have the same numbers that we have today for the current districts, then someone's going to have to explain why District 7 and District 3 were drawn the way they were. So you may choose to accept that language or you may choose not to.
But at least the public will know.
If you decide to accept that language, yes. So I think it'd be in order to entertain a motion as to whether that subset of option C applies.
I would move that we include it.
Second.
It's been properly moved and second. Any discussion? Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Raise your hand.
Aye.
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 Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That takes us to
Detailed justification.
issue number 4 on slide 20, public participation. Option A, we've discussed at some length, and that's the software training. I think there's broad consensus on that point. And we've added some details about the schedule of classes, the private computers, and the public computers. Option B is 1 public hearing before and 1 public hearing after. A variation of option B would be 2 public hearings before and 2 public hearings after. And then option C is 1 hearing in each council district before and 1 hearing in each council district after.
Just as a point of discussion, it seems to me, I like the idea of lots of hearings, but it seems like those would be more beneficial afterwards. So that way we're talking about actual maps. So that way, basically, they put up a proposed map, and then they got to kind of go around and defend it in each of the districts. So afterwards, there's actual specifics. So I would kind of do a hybrid where there's 1, maybe 2 hearings before where we don't have an actual map to talk about, but then actually go with 8 on the back end, because I think it's worth it for them to have to go around and basically take the arrows on what people don't like and what the issues are before they actually put it in stone.
Okay, Mr. Espino?
Yeah, I think when you first start, you want to refresh the public where we've been, right? And what the criteria is. And I don't know if you need 8 separate public hearings for that. And then when the sausage is getting made, that's when you want super public participation.
An alternative to 8 is to combine some of the districts. So you could say combine districts 2 and 7 in 1 public hearing for those 2 paired districts. That gets you down to 4 hearings instead of 8 if the number of districts is a concern, the number of hearings is a concern.
Any other discussion, any comments? Mr. Shore?
I like the pairing idea. I like the pairing idea to cut down the total number of hearings. And I also note that, given the size of District 7, because you haven't, never mind.
Ms.
I like the idea of pairing.
Okay, Ms. Ayala?
I like the idea of pairing as well. The question I had was around the software training, just to get some further clarification. Could you elaborate just a little bit more on that, Mr. Costa?
Yes.
The reason is that I know that there are several people, and particularly I'm thinking of the college, where we've distributed, computers to folks because they don't have personal computers at home. So other than going to the public library, is that the only area, that opportunity that folks, particularly I'm thinking again at the college levels?
Right, we're not limited to libraries and community centers. Those are options that the city could easily do directly, but if Tarrant County College were able to make computers available, that would be all to the good. We would be delighted to cooperate with Tarrant County College or anybody else who would be willing to provide access to computers for our residents.
Okay, all right.
I just wanted to ask the question also. So I think the training for the software is really important. And I think we've awakened people to the importance of it, even though we may not have the numbers right now, Mr. Williams. But people are interested in wanting to get on and learn the software process, which is going to take some time. So we talked about, was there a discussion about live streaming the training at some point? So when people were available to...
If it's possible, we'll look into the possibility of having a video for training residents. So people can take their training at any time of the day or night. That would not be interactive, so it would lose that advantage. But we could, I don't know, I'm looking at Michelle. Michelle is nodding. So it sounds like it's feasible.
Okay.
We could produce a video in addition to having live training, which is probably of most benefit to most people.
Because I'm not computer literate.
Right.
And I know that. So I would have to have the live training.
Sure.
But for people who really want to just see how the process works and try to get involved, then
the video may be sufficient.
Yes. Ms. Kennedy?
From when ESRI did their programming with us, they made it pretty clear that they have training modules that you can go onto their website and do. So if you don't want to do live in-person training, you can do at your own pace training. So there's lots of opportunities for that. And back to what Ms. Ayala said about residents using the software on public computers at designated libraries and community centers, maybe we can add and other community partners so that we have that in there so that people will know that we're not going to limit that to only being
We'll add in
at
other
city.
suitable locations if that's acceptable. That's a good suggestion. We'll add that language.
Yeah, that's great because again, we just know not everyone has a personal computer and we just want to make sure folks have the access. That's what we're concerned about. Thank you for that.
It does beg the question, if you don't have a computer, you're kind of up the creek. So it is, most folks have TV, so you can live stream it and see it. Can we see it on FWTV also?
We can definitely make the information available for them to see it and on cable and then also have it available on the website. I think the bigger challenge we always have is giving them the actual access to a computer if they want to do it. And so our goal is to actually train staff so that they can help them if they're at the community centers and the libraries, but we can also reach out to some of the partner organizations and make sure we have people there who are trained who can help Because for some people, you know, having a video to watch or even having a manual is not going to be as effective as if they have someone that can help walk them through the process or at least get them to the website. So we're going to be looking at training staff so that they can be available at different sites.
And so, Ms. Gutt, with that, there are a lot of people who, if you don't try to offer various venues for them to learn, then you still get criticism and they say, well, it's not accessible to me. But whatever we can do to make it more accessible to the public is sort of like the COVID-19 vaccination. They go to the website. Well, if you don't have a website and you're sitting at home and you need a vaccination, it doesn't help you. So we've got to think out of the box, I think, a little bit.
And one thing we've actually done too, when we have our bond election and we go out to the community to have them give input on the bond projects, we've actually taken laptops out to the locations and then had staff available to help people on the laptops. So that's another option too. If we get a bank of laptops, that we could take those out to community facilities that might not have a computer, but would be willing to let us set up to reach some of the communities that don't have access to technology.
And then the other part of it is people have got to know when it is. That is a communication. Doesn't do you any good to have all these extra venues and people don't know when they can use it. Mr. Williams?
Yes. How close are we working with the Fort Worth Independent School District? Now, you talk about locations in neighborhoods. Now, there's in every district we're talking about have several locations. I'm quite sure if we talk with the superintendent and let them understand what we're trying to do in the purpose, then we'll probably be able to get them to have computers available at these schools, and at a certain time, you could work with them.
We'd be glad to pursue that possibility.
Yeah, check with the superintendent.
I would, Madam Chair, based on the discussion, I would suggest that you consider including in your motion the following language. On option A, where it says city staff will publish, I would insert a catalog of training resources,
Okay.
including a schedule of classes in which staff will train interested residents on the use of ESRI redistricting software.
Okay.
So the catalog of training resources could include videos, could include all sorts of opportunities for people to get access to training. I would also suggest that on the third bullet point under option A, we say residents will also be able to use the software on public computers at designated libraries and community centers and at other suitable locations.
Yeah. With community partners too. We
You
talked
could
about
say
that.
community partners, but we're talking a library and a community center as a facility or a location as opposed to an organization.
Mr. Morris, you agree with that? Okay. Was there a second?
Second, yeah.
Mr. Williams? Any further discussion?
And I think the other part of the motion, I didn't hear it as part of the motion, I heard it as part of the discussion, that there are several task force members who favor 2 public hearings before the redistricting process, and 4, 1 for every pair of council districts after the redistricting process, and before adoption of the district map.
Agreed.
We really want to have enough input from the public. That is one of the things that we heard at all of our public hearings, that people want to be involved, they want to know, and they want to have the hearings. And so we ought to offer them. I don't think we want to go to the point where it's non-productive, but Mr. Norris?
I was just going to advocate again for doing up to 8 afterwards. Just if we remember, once there was an actual map in the Austin process, and I know that was a different process because it was an IRC that was conducting it. But once they had a map, they conducted 50 hearings. And it was an opportunity because we're talking about like really detailed, specific things where there's a street and they want it moved 2 blocks over because it's really important to them. And so I think, when it's a really detailed thing. And so the idea of having 8 hearings is not outrageous. And I know that's a ton of time and effort for staff and all of that. But, you know, I think it's worth it. And I think it's worth it for the council to kind of have to go around, and I think it's a healthy process to kind of defend their map and be able to hear input from all of these different folks, and there to be plenty of opportunity, because we even experienced it. I mean, in the hearings that we did, you know, you've got a limited amount of time, and if you're looking at this map of the city over here and all the detail of it, you can just imagine if we only have 4 hearings, everybody may not get a chance to really be heard on streets and corners and the different things that might be really important to them. So I think 8 would be great.
I'd like to, personally, I think 4 would work if they're coupled, but I think coupled with that, with the registration that we've already supported, that people will have an opportunity to, you know, get their oar in the water early on with whatever concerns they have, and then it's a matter of, I think 4 is. It forces the council. Mr. Shore?
Yeah, I am fine with 4 as under the at least provision. I would certainly hope that the council would do more. And I note that when you talk about having the number of hearings that cities like Austin who have done, that's usually because they're not having to involve an actual city council member. It's because they've got a commission rather than having individual, council members making these decisions. So the number of meetings that you can actually have with the public does depend upon the availability of the council members to attend these meetings, I think.
So are we suggesting, if we're suggesting the council member is involved, but would having the 4 that would have 2 council people at a hearing, is that possible? Or we don't want to recommend that, or we want the individual councilman? Ms. Scott?
So, am I on mute?
No.
I think I'm on mute.
No,
I'm not.
we
Okay,
hear you.
great. I was just agreeing with you.
Okay.
I think Mr. Scher's suggestion was at a minimum or at least a series of 4 joint meetings paired by, closed council districts, but that's just the minimum threshold, and that also keeps it open for additional meetings. I think that's an excellent suggestion. You establish a floor of 4 joint meetings, but the council can certainly always have more, and the public can always demand more. It's not like written in stone. It's a recommendation.
It would be a minimum.
It would be a minimum. So I do like Mr. Scher's suggestion here as a nice balancing recommendation.
How many meetings did they have when they did this last time?
I don't remember. Mary, do you remember?
They had one in every district, though. They had a meeting when they redrew the lines. I know.
I don't know that they had one in every district.
I know.
I know they had.
I just know when.
Council meetings, but I don't know that they had one in every district.
Because could we suggest that each council member hold one themselves in their district, and
That would be the 8. That's
Back at 8, yeah.
okay,
Actually-
so
I would actually.
Okay, go ahead.
I would actually prefer having them be separate now that I think about it, in terms of not having 2 or more council members present discussing mapping, except they are public meetings. But will the map drawing software be available at these meetings? I tried to understand the logistics of how these meetings would be conducted.
Well, our expectation was that these public hearings would not involve the drawing of maps. It would just be an opportunity to hear from the public, just as the task force heard from the public. And we asked you to listen and not engage in debate, just listen. That's what these hearings would be, for the council members and staff to listen to the public. What do you think about these draft maps?
Ms. Scott?
And based upon the comments that they received, then they could go back to a formal council meeting, and in the light of the public, redraw the lines if that's what they want to do.
And then Ms. Kennedy.
So this conversation is based on, whether, there will be people upset and want to come voice their opinion. And that might not be, depending upon how the lines are drawn. Also, if they register, or if you have to sign up that you want to voice your opinion, that can still determine whether or not you partner with another district or whether you have one on your own. And if there's two on the back end, then the first one maybe each district has their own. And then the second meeting, they partner together depending upon, what the outcome is of the first first public hearing.
Ms.
But I
Kennedy?
think this is still a conversation that and let me just be the one to say that public turnout for redistricting is not that high. So we are talking about having 8 meetings with potentially 3 people in the room, maybe 5. 10, we're doing really good. So that's a lot of meetings, a lot of setup, and a lot of energy put into having a redistricting open, public hearing, and the turnout is not there. So I think there should be some kind of registration that determines whether or not this is going to be a couple, grouping of districts, or whether this is going to be an individual, or whether it's going to be one meeting, everybody show up, because there's only going to be 30 people in the room.
Ms. Kennedy and then Ms. Guzman.
Well, I was just going to say, I live in District 6, and our councilman meets with us once a month, every month. So I'm sure he would be happy to meet with the people of our district about this redistricting map as soon as it comes out. And I would hope that every council person that is elected this May would also want to meet with their constituents to find out what they think about the map before it's finally put in place. And if not, if they don't want to hear from their people, then perhaps we do need an independent redistricting commission. But I hear exactly what Tracy is saying, that's a very good point. So maybe we need to think about some flexibility in the language of this procedure and how we can make this so that it's doable for the council people to be able to have some sort of meeting, as well as for staff to be able to say, okay, if we're only going to have 3 people, it's not worth making a big to-do of it.
Ms. Guzman?
So to kind of combine some of the things that you just said into what I was about to say, Ms. Kennedy, to your point, the council members will always be able to hear from constituents. Most of them have times that they already have set up where they talk to their constituents. But I would really recommend that these public hearings would include the entire council, because just because one council member is present, if there's an issue with the map, it's most likely because there's 2 districts or more even involved. So by having just the one council member there, you may not have all of the people there that you even need to discuss the issue with it that the people have with the map. So I would really recommend the entire council be there. It's the entire council that adopts the map. Obviously, a lot of deference is given to a council member for that district, but nevertheless, I really think that it needs to be a group that goes to those meetings. And just as you all had, you have to have a quorum of the council there for those public meetings. That would be my advice to you.
Well, that's great, but I hear the little lady that called and gave me an hour and a half of grief about her section of Meadowbrook, that she just wants somebody to listen to. In a big meeting like that, I can see where Ms. Rogers gets lost. But we'll do what the task force suggests. So we have we don't have a motion. We just had discussion. Do we have a motion or we do not? We don't. I don't think we do.
We're agreeing on option A with all the landed language that Fernando put in there. It's just the level of outreach, and I'm fine either way with 8 or more. I'm fine with joint. really, it's going to be a demand from the public about, they can, weigh in with their council members about, so I'm fine with whatever the task force wants to do here.
Bear in mind, if you're talking about 8 or more, and former Councilmember Espino, I would ask you to think back to your lengthy service on the city council. If the council were to be asked, would you be willing to have at least 8 public hearings in which we have to have a quorum present at every one? Are you willing to do that? The first sound we would hear is probably a groan.
Well, then, you clarified it, then I'm fine with, like we said, at least 2 public, like I said, like a range, 2 public meetings before to explain to the public what the redistricting process is going to be like, and then those joint meetings throughout the city at a minimum, and if the public demands more, then the council would have that flexibility. So that's the kind of language that would give you that flexibility.
Okay. Ms. Ayala?
Yes, I was just going to say what Mr. Espino mentioned. I'd like to just establish at least a baseline to give them, whether it's the 4, that way there's an expectation. If there's a decision to be, where somebody wants to inform their council district, that's fine. But I personally would like to just establish some sort of a baseline for them, and that way everybody knows going forward what the expectation is.
Okay. Mr. Shore, did you have your hand up?
I did. One of the motions that I have later deals with the subject of having council meetings devoted exclusively to redistricting. And this particular option says the city council conducts a series of 8 or more virtual or hybrid public hearings, which I agree with. And I think they would be separate, but I think it should be made clear that when we say they'll conduct a series of meetings, it is with the entire body or with a quorum of the council. I mean, it doesn't really, I think it's somewhat implicit, but it doesn't quite say that.
We can add the words "a quorum of" to make it clear.
Okay.
So with that, I'll make a motion then that we go with option A with the amendments as presented by Mr. Costa previously, and option C with the threshold minimum number of public hearings with a quorum of council present of a minimum of 4 joint meetings, right? And the council may add more at their discretion and in response to the public need. That's my motion.
Is there a second?
And what about before? Do we address before?
And two public meetings before the maps are drawn with a quorum of the council present as well. So yes, that's my motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
This is Teresa, and I'll second it.
Oh, we got 3 seconds.
All right.
Okay.
Oh, good.
All in favor of issue 4, public participation with options A and C, please raise your hands and say aye.
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 Thank you, Mr. Bradshaw. Okay.
Can I ask a question right quick?
Yeah,
Do we
so-
know how many public computers are available to be used out in the city? How many are available, and then how many in each district?
Who knows? Because I can just only speak for my neighborhood at the Chamblee Library. There are quite a few.
I don't expect that that's going to be a limiting factor. And if it does appear to be an issue, we can certainly turn to our partner organizations, Tarrant County College, the different school districts and so forth, to make sure that there is adequate access to computers. If we get such a strong demand, that would be a wonderful problem to have.
Absolutely. All right. Are we prepared to move on to issue 5?
Yes.
All right. Mr.
Okay, number 5 is about transparency. And this has to do with the extent to which you want to require all redistricting activity to occur in front of the public. And we show you 3 options. Option A, we've already covered in effect with the public hearings. Option B is that all deliberations about redistricting be conducted in official meetings, subject to all provisions of the Open Meetings Act. And option C adds to it that any communications about map drawing would occur at official meetings with any relevant computer screen visible to the council and public observers. You could take all three of one or just go with option C, which encompasses A and B.
A and B.
So moved.
Motion's been
Motion.
by Mr.
Motion.
Williams. Is there a second? Move to
Option
take
C,
option.
which is understood
We're
as
option
encompassing
C.
A and B.
Option C, I'll second. Is that what just happened?
Yes.
Did Mr. Williams put
Mr.
a motion on
Williams
the floor
moved,
to accept?
Ms. Scott
C?
second. Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? All in favor, would you raise your hand and the aye?
Aye.
Aye?
Aye.
Thank you.
Aye.
We're all for transparency today. Okay.
Okay, slide 22, other issues. And this is a yes or no question. Should we exclude party affiliation from any demographic data available in the redistricting software?
Nonpartisan race, Ms. Guzman, partisanship is not a consideration with redistricting, right? I mean, I know there was a test case before the Supreme Court that argued that could extreme partisan gerrymandering be a violation of the U.S. Constitution, and the Supreme Court said it did not, right? Or just a legal question for Ms. Guzman about partisan gerrymandering. This is a nonpartisan position, city council and mayor, but just clarify for me about what the Supreme Court said about partisan gerrymandering.
Yeah, actually, partisan gerrymandering is okay. But I agree with you, Mr. Spino. This is not; these are nonpartisan races, and so
Yeah, it's not relevant. In my view, it's not relevant, so
Mine either.
we should exclude it, would be what I would say.
Yes.
I second.
Oh, it's okay.
Yeah, that was,
Any more discussion on it?
Is this for the public or this is for the council as well to consider?
This would be for both. The data about party affiliation will not be made available. Now, if the council wants to find out through other channels, they would be sure to do so, but
That would be my only concern, is just that, they may have other resources to be able to find that information and consider it. And then the public who's looking at all of our data that's being put out there, it's like the blinders are being put on and they don't get to see it. So, you may be dealing with two sets of data.
that's for you to decide. I don't, to my knowledge, the party affiliation is not included in the demographic data.
Right.
And this would ensure that nobody adds it to the data.
Mr. Williams?
I go along with what he just stated. From what I'm understanding, what's been for years, this is nonpartisan. So we don't need to, let's not bring this into. We got enough ignorant partisan stuff going on already. So we don't need that.
Okay, any other discussion? I'm looking at our colleagues on WebEx. Anybody? Okay. So can we do this by unanimous consent that we would not be nonpartisan? There would be no party affiliation?
I think we need to vote. You got to have a
We
record
need to vote? Okay,
Mhm.
let's vote. All in favor to exclude party affiliation, please raise your hand.
Aye.
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 Aye. Groovy. All right, our next one?
Okay, slide 22, item 2, under identifiable geographic boundaries, specify that to the extent possible, dwelling units that are located on opposite sides of the same residential streets shall be assigned to the same districts. That is to say, don't use a residential street to split
Okay.
a neighborhood.
I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been properly moved and second. Any further discussion? Any further discussion? We're prepared to vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Right.
Any noes, any abstentions? I forget to ask that sometimes, but we're all voting. Okay, our third one?
And then the third one, I would ask you to turn to slide number 24 for those three options. And earlier in the meeting, I think we heard Mr. Espino expressing a preference for option B. He may wish to elaborate.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the interest of transparency and full participation of the public, I think it's a cost to bear, even for if you have to reprint voter registration cards because people were moved, because redistricting process took longer. And so, I mean, to me, in the interest of fairness, transparency, and public participation, I think it's a cost worth bearing. So I'll go ahead and move for option B on the issue of voter registration cards and printing deadlines.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we've got 2 seconds to the second. Discussion? Any
Can we put
discussion?
something in there that we can push it as far into the future as possible? You know, so that leaving open if the state goes into its normal cycle of everything going to lawsuit and the primaries being pushed so that we have more time.
Yeah, sure. So we can make that move to adopt option B with flexibility for additional time due to any delays that may result from the overall redistricting process.
So we would only reprint the cards if it were necessary to do so.
Right.
So if a golden opportunity were to fall in our laps, obviously we wouldn't reprint the cards, but I think we need to be prepared to choose one of these options, that I would suggest you stick with one of these defined options. Right, print it twice if necessary, don't print it at all, don't print it again unless it's necessary, but that would be preferable to compressing the time frame, or for that matter, expending political capital trying to convince the governor to do something that he didn't want to do.
Okay.
Ms. Scott, I'm
I
sorry.
couldn't hear that.
Ms. Scott?
No, I was voting yes.
Oh, okay. We haven't quite got there, but we're about there. Ms. Ayala?
No, I was too. I thought you had said for us to vote. I
Okay,
apologize.
now we're voting on option B. All in favor? Say
Aye.
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 Raise it.
Aye.
All right, great. Groovy. Before we move on, are there any other criterias that task force members want to bring to our attention?
Well, Madam Chair, just before we even talk about all of Mr. Scher's motion, obviously, I think the elephant in the room, before we go through all that, is the Independent Redistricting Commission. So I would hope that we could have a robust discussion on Independent Redistricting Commission. I know he has it as motion number 10, but I think that should be the first motion we talk about, because that'll set this tone for everything else.
Okay, so can I go back to my, it was just a suggestion about the hypothetical redistricting schedule. Now that we've gone through all of our other discussions, is this something that we could really support and put in our procedures? Now that we've done,
The RRC? Is that something as far as the IRC? What you talking
No,
about?
no, no. The hypothetical redistricting schedule that we've talked about.
Oh,
Or do we
The one
want to
we've
go?
already, yeah. The one we've already talked about earlier, before beginning the discussion on these motions that I proposed. Yeah.
okay.
I would think that, depending upon what we decide on these motions that will be presented, we can always go back and revisit that issue.
Okay. Let's move forward.
I think, Madam Chair, the one thing,
agree.
I'm sorry. Madam Chair, the one thing
I was
that,
gonna say,
I'm sorry.
Mr. Costa has the floor right now, and then you're next, Ms. Ayala.
I'm sorry, Ms. Ayala, I didn't see you.
Go ahead, Mr. Costa.
Okay, I think the one point we can make in reference to slide number 27, based on your selection of option B about expending additional funds if necessary to do a second printing of the cards, where it says March of 2022, we can delete that row where it says if governor takes proposed emergency action, print voter registration cards with information. So we're no longer contemplating any emergency action by the governor. so we can delete the March item. The cards can get reprinted whenever the registrar is able to do so.
Ms. Kennedy?
Also, on the same slide on October, it would say the city council conducts 2 instead of 1 or more public hearings.
That's correct.
And then in January, it would say city council conducts 4
That's
instead
correct.
of 1 or more.
Thank you.
You see that? That's slide 27. Okay. 2 in October and 4 in January. Okay, so we got that cleared up. Mr. Shore? You have the floor, sir. Unmute yourself. Mr. Shore?
Okay, I'm
Okay,
back.
there you go.
Sorry about that. We almost all the speakers, I think, if you add them up numerically, who spoke before us, supported an independent redistricting commission. And of course, part of the reason for that is that this particular group of people are very well organized. So it's no surprise that the most interested people who spoke before us supported an independent redistricting commission. I decided to, just thinking about this, to look at what would an independent redistricting commission, as proposed by our speakers, what would it look like? Would it be feasible? Would it be possible to meet all the required deadlines and actually get this accomplished in a reasonable way? And could we fairly choose a group of people who would, as they did in Austin, a group of auditors or some other group who could screen applicants who wanted to be on this independent redistricting commission? We all heard from T.J. Costello about how that process worked. Many people apparently from Austin are very pleased with it. I'm sure there are other people who have other opinions. There seems to be a trend towards moving to independent redistricting commission. So for that purpose, I not only prepared the timeline, which I hope everybody has had a chance to look at, to demonstrate that it could be done, but I have prepared a motion that I would like to present so that we can discuss it. So let me make that motion. Unfortunately, I don't have it right on the screen.
It's item number 10 on slide 41.
Let's see.
It's the very last slide.
Is that your latest reiteration of it, sir?
That is the latest version that we received.
All right, well, this is, I'm not seeing it on what okay, let me get, I'm having a little technical problems here for a second.
Slide 41, version 7.
Okay, yeah. So I move that the task force recommend to the city, in accordance with the direction by the council, that the task force advise the city council about redistricting criteria and procedures that the city council should use in the future, that the city council, after the May 21 election and the June 21st runoff, by ordinance or resolution, create an independent redistricting commission to accomplish the redistricting of Fort Worth City Council districts before the May 2023 City Council election, with the redistricting process being modeled after the redistricting process developed by the City of Austin, with such modifications as may be deemed appropriate to meet the needs of the residents of the City of Fort Worth.
Second.
Okay, it's been properly moved and second. The floor is open for discussion.
Mr. Schurer, I just have a question. Is that, if I'm reading it right, it would basically nullify everything else we've done to this point?
It would not nullify our selection of criteria necessarily. We could amend it to direct that the redistricting commission apply the criteria established by the council. I mean, it's not meant to nullify anything. Really, the things that came before it was on the criteria for sure.
It just wouldn't apply as such to IRC in the same way that we've been talking about it, right?
Well, I would want to go back and modify the directions to the IRC. I mean, the council itself would, in creating an IRC, adopt an ordinance, and that ordinance would set forth the ground rules by which the IRC would operate. And so I would think we would want the council also in its ordinance to adopt the same recommendations that we have proposed for it in some modified form. It would take probably another meeting to get all of the pieces put together if this motion were to be accepted. But I believe that the staff could really put the pieces together and apply what we've already recommended in the event that we were to go for an independent redistricting commission.
Mr. Spino?
I mean, I would say that you could say the Independent Redistricting Commission obviously would have to follow the criteria that this task force has recommended. You know, all the stuff we talked about today, everything we've adopted. The key difference is instead of the council drawing the maps, it would hope to be a citizens independent redistricting commission, right? And then there, the council would have flexibility about who's appointed to that independent redistricting commission, right? And so all these criteria are based on sound redistricting principles anyway, right? From criteria number 1 to 10, and that could be part of this independent redistricting commission would have to follow the redistricting criteria. We could add to this motion, if Mr. Sher would like to say, you know, in compliance with the redistricting procedure and procedures recommended by the redistricting task force, but then the council would have flexibility as to the composition of the Independent Redistricting Commission, and it being a public body would have to comply, of course, with Open Meetings Act, Public Information Act, Robert's Rules of Order, Parliamentary Procedure. But the key distinction is the Independent Redistricting Commission draws the maps in public, not the city council. That's the key distinction, and that's why I support this, because I think not only the citizens that came to our meetings, I think you would say that if you were to do a poll or a survey of citizens of Fort Worth, that they would like this idea. And number two, I think it really is best practices. I think you're seeing that more and more at the local level and also at state levels. It's just a good practice to do this, and that's why I support the idea of an independent redistricting commission. The council may very well reject this recommendation. After all, it's within their discretion to reject this recommendation should this task force adopt this recommendation.
Ms. Kennedy, Mr. Williams, and Mr. Norris.
So you're saying that we were given a charge by the city to give them, the council, to give them criteria and procedures. And you're saying that now we're going to tell them, no, we don't want to do what you asked us to do. We're going to tell you that we want someone else to do the job that you were duly elected to do. And we don't want to do the job that you asked us to do in the way you asked us, but we're going to tell you how to tell someone else to do it. And we're going to expect them to follow the rules that we put in place. And we're going to expect them not to go against our rules in the same way we went against the charge that came to us. Explain to me the logic in that. This sounds like the logic of my children, not the logic of adults.
I don't think I need to say anything since I've just heard Ms. Kennedy, because I feel the same way. You know, it seems like they gave us a charge. Yeah, they gave us a charge, and it seems like we've done what they've asked us to do now. And of course, from what I'm understanding, which I wasn't part of this, but it seemed like there were some recommendations that were made by a group prior to us having given this information. It was, what task force was that?
The racing culture,
Yeah, the racing culture
they
task force.
recommended that.
They recommended that and still seemed like, they said, no, we don't want to do that. We're going to appoint citizens. Now, if they appointed us, I think we need to do exactly what they ask us to do. Then once we do that, then even if we recommended that they would set up the IRC, that doesn't mean they're going to do it. And I think it's really I think the main thing we got to do is try to work with the city council people and try to get them to understand that might be a different way of doing what they've asked us to do. And then by going that way. But I can't really recommend to them, even though I can see the logic in the IRC. I can see the logic in what they're doing, but I don't think that should be a recommendation from us to them.
Thank you. I agree. I can see the logic in an IRC too. The problem is we've not been set up to answer that question. And so we have had very thoughtful presentations on the benefits of IRCs. Like we have. What we've not heard is why we shouldn't do an IRC, because that wasn't our task to decide. And so we certainly, there are good arguments why we wouldn't do an IRC. And I honestly don't know, as we sit here right now, where I would fall if I was being asked to vote on that. But I'm not being asked to vote on that, and we've not really heard testimony or advice on that. We've heard most of one side, and we have heard from a few individuals who care very deeply about it and are very thoughtful about it. But we know that there is another side to that. And I'm a trial lawyer. This would be like stopping after one side presents their case and then asking the jury to go back and vote. And that doesn't make any sense. And the reason we haven't heard from the other side is because that wasn't our task. We weren't being asked to decide on the wisdom of an IRC. Because we might, if we heard all the evidence, we might decide, yeah, it's a great idea, or we might decide, no, there's really good reasons why the council decided not to go that route. Because remember, San Antonio went a different route. They didn't do an IRC. And they ended up, I know that we've all talked about the importance and the goal of better reflecting diversity in our city and all of those things. And I think a lot of people that are passionate about an IRC are that way because they believe that might be a way to get there, right? That might be a way to get to a more diverse and more voices being heard and all of that. We could all say we all agree. But remember, San Antonio didn't go that route, and they ended up with a pretty diverse council. And so there may be more than one way to peel this orange. And we had not been given the information to be able to make that decision. We just haven't. And so I can't vote for an IRC. I haven't heard the arguments against it. We haven't heard from anybody that's made an argument against an IRC. And so I don't think it's our place to vote for an IRC.
Thank you. Mr. DeVito?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say that I am opposed to and will vote against the motion since we were not tasked to render a decision on IRCs. We were asked to submit a series of guidelines, which I think we're doing quite well at, and also to point out that the City Council has retained the option and the right to appoint an IRC at any time they wish to. So they still have that opportunity should they decide that's the best way to go. And that's just all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Great. Ms. Ayala?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say that, one of the things that was very obvious to me during those sessions that we sat through was that this was something that the public requested. So I felt that it was important for us to take that back and that we should listen to that. And I think that being that we were tasked to bring criteria, to me, this kind of falls within that we have this criteria that the request from the public was to create this independent redistricting commission. I think it also provides transparency as well, an opportunity for transparency. So I think that this does fall within what we were requested to do, which was to provide some criteria, and I think this is one of those.
Okay. Ms. Scott and Mr. Bradshaw next.
So I don't understand by making this motion, what happens? What does this does this do anything different from all of the voices that we've heard that said they want the Independent Redistricting Commission, which were very clear in its public meetings, and then also what the Race and Culture Task Force suggested. So does this, by making this motion and voting on this motion, then what happens? What leverage does this give anyone? Is that I hope.
I'd like to explain this a little bit further. First of all, redistricting procedure, the city council could do any of a number of things in order to get maps produced that it would ultimately approved. This redistricting for this election, if it were to be done by a commission, the map would ultimately have to be approved by the council anyway. This is not like we're amending the charter. There's a legal distinction here. So what we would have is we would actually have an independent commission that was modeled after and worked pretty much the same way as the Austin Commission did. And it's pretty well spelled out, I think, in the timeline that I prepared, what the sequence would be, how the members of the commission would be picked. There would be three auditors, or there would be auditors, an auditor's body who would be charged with the task of reviewing applications to be on the commission. There would be a selection process by which the auditors picked 8 members. Those 8 members would then pick another 6 in case, just to cover, be sure everything was, that all the groups were adequately represented, and they would proceed to have the public meetings and so on and so forth. At the end of this process, however, the commission, what the commission decided would not be the actual redistricting, because we can't do that under the city's charter right now. I don't think that the council would be, by adopting this, would be saying we're not going to pass an ordinance approving the final map, because the council has to approve something. The council would have the power to reject what this independent redistricting commission did. If they don't like it, they can do something else. But that is what essentially, it would be very difficult, I think, for the council to reject what the outcome of this process. So I did not put in here all of the details of how this would be done, who would be, who, the timelines, any of that stuff. I prepared it as a timeline to show that it could be done, but I believe that staff could, with this proposal, they could flesh out the remainder according to a schedule, and it could be presented to the council. If the council want them to go that way.
Thank you, Mr. Shore. Mr. Bradshaw?
Yeah, so just a couple things. One, and I agree with your points and everything, but in terms of we didn't hear the arguments against, et cetera. But this is not a trial. We're here to give advice, essentially. That's basically what the city council said to us. Give us your best advice, and we'll consider what we want, and we'll throw away what we want. I think, if we want to take a vote, we can take a vote. If it goes, great. If not, it doesn't erase anything that we've done. We basically, set the criteria saying, if you're going to continue to do it the way you want to do it, here's our suggested criteria and procedures, and you can move on with those. And again, pick and ignore all of them. We can take a vote and say, you know what? We did listen to the citizens. You asked us to listen to the citizens. And based on the ones that showed up, the majority by a wide margin said, we want an independent redistricting commission. And so we're saying, again, the Race and Culture Task Force said that you should consider this. You put us aside. You put us into the task of giving you criteria and procedures. We've given you those. We're coming back and we're going to reiterate that we heard from the citizens and, however many of us said, let's try to get an IRC because that seemed what, the citizens want. And some of us on the task force want to do that as well. This is, in my 2 cents again on my soapbox, it's a conflict of interest for the city council to choose their voters. That just flies in the face of logic to me. And also, the way this whole thing is set up, if the city council has to go and have all these different meetings with, each district, et cetera, to explain and defend their decision of a map, how much time is that taking away from the other, business of the city that we've elected them to do? So to me, this actually helps put it in the right place and actually frees the council members to actually do what we've truly elected them to do.
Okay, any further discussion?
I want to say thank you to everybody. It's been a robust discussion and appreciate all the different perspectives on this. That's what democracy is about, and this is the way you're supposed to have a vigorous public debate. Thank you.
Absolutely, Mr. Spino. And one of the things that I want to assure the task force, up or down, we're going to have to say to the council, this is what we heard. It's not as if the independent redistricting committee, this was a carefully orchestrated demonstration, and they got their message out, and they came to the hearings and participated in the process. That's democracy. And we're going to, whether we offer a recommendation or not, we're going to say to the council, with all of us, hello, America, all of us there, to say to the redistricting, this is what we heard from the public. And we heard a whole lot of things. Transparency, that people really want to participate in. And so we've got to make sure that they understand that there is, what is it? Sometimes people say perception is 9/10 of the law. People perceive that the council is closed to public input. And so we have been trying with the criteria and the procedures to come up with a method that the public can feel, I'm in this. I got some skin in the game and my voice is going to be heard. And so we're going to do that in our presentation, all of us, if we can get to the meeting. All right, if there's no further discussion, we have a motion on the floor that has been seconded. All in favor of, this is number 10, the Independent Redistricting Commission. Would you raise your hand? You're in favor of the Independent Redistricting Commission. And Ms. Kayser, what? Okay.
Looks like 5 in favor.
Okay, all opposed?
Looks like 5 opposed.
So we're deadlocked, right? 5 and 5, right?
Yep.
So it's deadlocked. The motion fails because of a tie, so the motion fails.
All right. What other business do we have? We've got to approve our recommended redistricting criteria and procedures.
Yeah,
Well,
that's
you
what we've
may want to
done.
go through items, I don't know, items 1 through 9 from Mr. Schur's list. They should not take nearly as long as the discussion you just
Do
had.
we have to go through, since the motion failed?
The motion just failed.
Or do we have to go through the rest of this, since the motion failed?
Well, the
these are
items 1 through
different
9
issues.
are independent of item 10.
They're independent. These
I
are,
read them. Yeah, I read them at home.
yeah, I read them. Okay. Mr. Schur, I
All
think
right.
all of us have read them.
Yeah.
Can we consider them, you want to speak to them? If we go through them individually, what is your pleasure? We could do this en bloc, meaning all of them together, or if we feel uncomfortable, do them up and down. That would be 9.
I would prefer doing 1 and 2 together. And then 3, 4, 5. 3, 4, and 5 together.
Now, Mr. Shore, let me, you got to go, Mr. Williams? Mr. Williams is leaving us.
You still have a quorum?
Yes.
Still have a quorum? Okay.
I just wanted to ask Mr. Shore on number 5, communications among council members. We've already said that we wanted the meetings to be open to the public and the maps displayed and all of that. Has that been addressed to your satisfaction?
No, it hasn't. And the reason I say it hasn't is that what I propose by number 5 is to have it be that 2 or more council members cannot, get together in an office and discuss it. We're not talking about a meeting with all the council members present as a quorum or sitting as a body. We're just talking about informal discussions between 2 council members.
Okay.
So it's a separate.
Mr. Shore, then let's start. Let's do 1 and 2 and pair, 3, 4, and 5?
Yes.
And then 6 is a standalone?
6 and 7 are together.
Okay, and then public
8,
meetings, redistricting in a single agenda. So that's 8 and 9, charter
and then
review.
9. Yeah.
I don't think we need to go to 9. We just talked about the IRC.
We just,
No.
yeah.
No,
Okay.
actually, 8, number 10 dealt only with the 2023 redistricting. This deals with the culture, race and culture task force recommendation that the council appoint a charter review commission to do the kinds of in-depth study that we as a group did not do.
Okay, Mr. Shore, let's get started with it. Let's get 1 and 2 because it's 6 now. Or do we want to take a quick 5-minute?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. How many do we need for a quorum? Because our schedules are getting out of whack here.
Yeah. Mr. Shore, can you start? And we need, I'm sorry.
Well,
We can do it. Let's run through them.
Let's run through them.
I move that the task force recommend to the mayor and council that the city retain 1 or more independent contractors to propose an initial map or maps applying the criteria adopted by the council. Such map or maps to be considered along with initial maps proposed by city staff and citizens or citizens groups as a starting point for further map drawing deliberations.
Any discussion?
You should also read number 2. If we're going to
Yeah,
consider.
number 2, yeah.
Read number 2.
We're going to do them together.
And I move that the task force recommend to the mayor and council that the council designate 1 of the maps submitted to the council by the independent contractors, city staff, and citizens or citizens group to serve as a starting point for further map drawing deliberations.
Any discussion?
Are there any seconds?
Yeah. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Who was that, Mr. Bradshaw? Okay. It's been properly moved and second. Any discussion? Any discussion? Okay, no discussion. All in favor? Would you raise your hand?
So we're voting on 1 and 2.
1 and 2.
Hiring an outside contractor to make a map in addition to all the maps
Yes.
by the citizens and
The selection of an initial map as a starting point. So, as a guide.
okay.
Now, last time around, just for your information, the city staff produced a starter map based largely upon the citizen-produced maps that we had received. So
May I ask, go ahead. No, I just wanted to make an observation. So, once the citizens draw their maps, the city staff would look at them?
yes,
Do you compile them?
we would compile them, we would analyze each one and say, this one meets all the criteria, this one doesn't meet the criteria, these are some good features, and then produces a kind of consensus map that serves as a starting point for the council to engage in
okay.
all the
And all
redrawing.
that gets presented to the council so
Yes.
they will see that?
Yes,
Okay?
now, what item, motion number 1 would do, would add to that process an independent contractor.
So what would be the benefit of that? I know that outside of that, that's going to add a cost to the budget, but why would we want to do that instead of the process that we already have in place?
Well, we have not had, we've rejected the independent commission as such, but this would add an independent view to the city that I think would add value.
Well, the last time we did redistricting, if I remember from our time of seeing this, the actual map that we now use was almost exactly the same as one submitted by a citizen with like one section in far east Fort Worth moved just a smidge. So that felt like fairly independent of the council being the ones actually drawing that map.
Yeah.
Well,
I think interesting, Bill, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
I
thank
think
you.
Go ahead, Mr. Bradshaw.
The interesting thing about Bill's point here is that it does kind of say, you know what, let's forget all the legacy maps, because that is one thing that I don't like about the city council doing it in the first place, is because they're not going to want to change things very much. If someone comes in with a very clean look at it and it uses our criteria that we put together, right, and throws out the old map, it's gonna be a fresh starting point, saying this meets all the criteria, and and then start from there, right? But that's why the maps haven't changed that much. So going to your point, it barely changed. But I mean, it behooves the current city council not to change things very much, right? Because that's what got them elected.
But we're going to go from 8 to 10 council districts, so it's going to have to change quite a bit. And what's to say that any contractor is not going to go ahead and look and see what's already there? I mean, anytime I draw something or craft something, I go to Pinterest, I see what's already there, and I make it better. I don't normally start from scratch. Most map makers don't start from scratch anymore either. I mean, even the ESRI guys said they don't normally start from scratch with them.
All right, Mr. Norris now, and then I'll come back to the folks, and then I'll try to summarize the pros and cons, and then we'll go ahead and finish up.
Yeah, just a comment. I don't have a problem with having another starting point because they're not being required to pick that one. It's just one of the options that they'll have as a starting point. So it adds another, and I don't know, this is a question for the staff. Will these be published? Will each of these maps that are submitted be published?
They would be available for public review.
Okay. As long as that's the case and there's transparency on which one became the starting point and why, then I don't have a problem with potentially good ideas being thrown into the pot to get going.
All right, so what we have here is obviously the first two deal with an independent contractor that presents a map. Mr. Scher's intent, I think, was that you have an outside person present another map and the council looks at them. Ms. Kinney had concerns about the cost and also with the fact that the council is already looking at maps. So we already have a motion and a second. So all in favor of Mr. Scher's motion with respect to items 1 and 2, say aye and hold your hands. Aye.
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 Aye. Aye. All right, Ms. Kayser, you have everybody? All right. Is everybody saying aye? No? All right.
Aye.
All right, and then all those opposed?
Aye.
Who's opposed? All right, did you get everybody, Ms. Kayser? All right, I was acting as temporary chair while Ms. Miller stepped out. Now she's back.
Was Ms. Miller an aye on that vote, or did she abstain?
She abstained because she was
Okay.
for the
Call of the Wild. Okay.
Chairman Miller, on 4, 5, and 6, I'm wondering, do I need to read all of these, or may I simply move that we adopt 4, 5, and 6 as their?
Yeah, I'm sorry, we didn't vote on 3, Mr. Scher.
We didn't vote on.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I meant 3, 4, and 5. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit weird, punchy.
Has colleagues, everybody has read these and you know what they're saying? And you're prepared to discuss and vote? Mr. Scher, will you just kind of give us a 1-minute kind of summary of what 3, 4, and 5 are from your perspective?
Yeah. Well, since we're not having an independent commission being recommended here for 2023 redistricting, the basic goal here is to provide that the mayor and council, if they're going to communicate with staff or with the contractors to draw the initial map, that it be recorded, that these communications be recorded, preserved as public records, and made available to the public. So that's a transparency issue. The same thing about oral communications between council members. The oral communications. This would be that if the oral communications are made, that certain things be documented and put in the record. The date, time, place, and manner of the communication, parties participating, purpose, and a summary of the subjects discussed. These are not, and then finally, the fifth one deals with communications among the council members that they may not, that their communications must occur at public map drawing meetings and not in separate private meetings or groups of 2 or more. So Opens Records Act goes a long way. Open Meetings and Public Information Acts go a long way, but this supplements them to provide a greater degree of transparency.
Great. Any discussion?
Have you made the motion then? And then is there a second?
I move that we adopt 3, 4, and 5.
I second it. This is Teresa Ayala.
Okay. Any discussion?
Discussion. Yes.
I'm sorry.
So I won't vote for this. I don't